Hours after signing my divorce papers, I boarded a flight to Edinburgh with my 2 children. Meanwhile, my ex-husband and his wealthy family packed into a VIP maternity clinic to hear his mistress receive her ultrasound results. But the doctor revealed a genetic truth that left all 7 of them completely speechless. I am Clara, 33 years old, and a forensic accountant who spent 8 years married to a man who thought I was nothing but a convenient stepping stone. When his family forced me to sign away my home and my marriage, they handed me a settlement check and laughed. I simply smiled, took my children, and left. They had no idea they were sitting on a massive financial time bomb that I had just detonated. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family who thought they could walk all over you. Sign on the dotted line, Clara. Let us not make this any more tedious than it already is. Harrison sounded bored. His voice cut through the sterile, over-air-conditioned atmosphere of the downtown Boston law office. He did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the heavy mahogany conference table, his fingers drumming an impatient, arrogant rhythm against the polished wood. Beside him sat his mother Patricia, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that cost more than my first car. She exuded an aura of smug satisfaction that she did not bother trying to conceal. The visual hierarchy of power they were trying to project across this sprawling conference table was laughable. On their side of the table sat Harrison, the man I had called my husband for 8 long years. Next to him was Patricia, the matriarch, who had made it her absolute life mission to constantly remind me of my middle-class roots. Beside her sat Richard, my father-in-law, checking his heavy gold Rolex every 2 minutes, as if my very presence was costing him thousands of dollars in billable hours. Sitting slightly behind Harrison like a victorious shadow was Brittany. Brittany was 24, pregnant, and currently admiring her freshly manicured nails. On my side of the table sat just me and my lawyer. I did not need a crowd. I just needed my pen. "We are offering you a very generous settlement," Clara, Patricia chimed in. Her voice dripped with the kind of condescension usually reserved for unruly children or hired help. $100,000. Considering you contributed practically nothing to the family empire, and given little Luke in his condition, we feel this is more than fair. You relinquish all claims to the Beacon Hill estate, you take the children, and you walk away. Quietly. My focus narrowed, zoning in on the crisp black ink of the settlement check resting on top of the divorce decree. $100,000. To them it was a hush-money payoff. It was a cheap way to quickly erase the forensic accountant who had unfortunately given birth to a daughter, Emma, and a son, Luke, who battled severe asthma. Patricia loved to loudly attribute my son's health issues to what she called the weak genetics on my side of the family. They wanted the house. They wanted the assets. Most importantly, they wanted room for Brittany, who was currently carrying what they constantly referred to as the true heir. Brittany leaned forward intentionally, catching the overhead lights with her left hand. A massive 4-carat cushion-cut diamond sparkled aggressively on her ring finger. "It really is a lovely house, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Harrison and I already have the nursery planned out. We are doing a high-end safari theme for the baby. A growing boy needs a strong masculine environment to thrive." Harrison finally looked up, his chest puffing out slightly at the mention of a boy. "Just sign it, Clara. You are getting full custody. You are getting cash. Do not be vindictive just because things did not work out between us. I need to move on with my life, and my son deserves a proper home." I looked at the 4 of them, feeling an incredible sense of clarity. For 8 years I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had endured Patricia making backhanded compliments about my quaint career tracking numbers. I had stayed silent when Richard boasted about his real estate empire while routinely exploiting legal loopholes that I could see right through. I had played the good, supportive wife while Harrison spent his days playing at being a successful businessman on his father's dime. They expected me to break down. They wanted me to cry, to scream, to beg for my marriage, or to demand a fair share of the $2.5 million Beacon Hill estate that I had personally decorated. They wanted the satisfaction of watching me shatter. I simply picked up my pen. You are entirely right, Harrison. I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of a single tremor. Your son deserves exactly the environment he is about to be born into. I uncapped the pen and signed my name on the first line, then the second line, then the third. My signature was precise, fluid, and final. I slid the thick stack of papers across the mahogany table toward their lawyer. I took the settlement check, folded it neatly in half, and slipped it into my purse. Patricia let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief, leaning back in her plush leather chair. Well, she announced, that was surprisingly civilized. I suppose even you know when you are outmatched, Clara. Let us hope you use that money wisely. It will not last long if you do not find a proper job to support those children. Oh, I manage my finances very carefully, Patricia, I replied, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my dress. You would be surprised how much clarity you gain when you really look at the numbers. Brittany giggled, linking her arm through Harrison's. We have an appointment at the maternity clinic tomorrow morning for the final genetic screening and ultrasound, she announced to the room, though her eyes were locked onto mine, seeking a reaction. The whole family is coming. Patricia is officially transferring the baby trust fund after the appointment. It is going to be such a beautiful day for us. I would not miss it for the world, Richard boomed, snapping his briefcase shut with a loud click. A new beginning for the family. A new beginning indeed, I agreed softly. I looked down at the glittering ring on Brittany's finger. It was a ring bought just 3 weeks ago. It was a ring I knew for an absolute fact was purchased on the joint platinum credit card that I had secretly and legally unlinked my name from exactly 24 hours after the transaction went through. They thought they had won. They thought they had discarded me with a fraction of what I was owed. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back as the heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their self-congratulatory laughter. Let them have the Beacon Hill house. Let them have their safari-themed nursery. Let them bask in their perceived victory. What Harrison, Patricia, Richard, and Brittany did not know was that they were not sitting on an empire. They were sitting on a ticking financial time bomb, and I had just handed them the detonator. My name is Clara. And as I walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the elevators, my heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained an impenetrable mask. The psychological warfare I had just endured in that conference room was a masterclass in manipulation. For the entire hour before I finally signed those papers, Patricia had orchestrated a relentless, coordinated attack designed to strip me of my dignity. She had always weaponized my background against me. You were a charity case, Clara, Patricia had hissed when the lawyers were briefly out of the room. Harrison picked you up from that state college covered in student debt, and we polished you into someone acceptable for high society. You should be paying us for the privilege of carrying our last name these past 8 years. And then came the attacks on my son, my sweet 6-year-old Luke. When he was diagnosed with severe asthma, Harrison acted like it was a personal insult. Patricia had leaned across the mahogany table today, her eyes glinting with malice, and said, "It is a blessing Harrison is finally having a healthy child with Brittany, a boy with strong lungs. We all know Luke inherited your family's defective genes. The boy cannot even run across the yard without needing an inhaler. A true Harrison man does not wheeze." I had dug my fingernails into my palms so hard they bled, but I did not shed a single tear. I knew that crying was exactly what they wanted. They fed on emotional destruction. They wanted me to shatter, to beg to show them that my spirit was broken. Instead, I had channeled every ounce of my energy into maintaining a stoic, statuesque posture. I was a fortress. I stared right back at Patricia with dead calm eyes and let her words bounce off me. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside the mirrored cabin and watched the floor numbers descend. 10, 9, 8. With every floor, the weight of their toxicity began to lift off my shoulders. I thought about Harrison sitting up there completely oblivious to his own impending doom. He believed his wealth insulated him from consequences. He believed Brittany was his ultimate prize, the perfect trophy wife to replace the boring accountant. He had no idea that his trophy was busy draining his accounts while his father's real estate empire crumbled under the weight of $15 million in hidden debt. I walked through the opulent marble lobby of the law firm and pushed through the revolving doors out onto the bustling streets of Boston. The crisp autumn air hit my face sharp and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the first taste of true freedom I had experienced in almost a decade. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to my nanny. "It is done. Bring Emma and Luke to Terminal E. We are going home." The drive to Logan International Airport felt like a breathless escape. The adrenaline pumped through my veins, accelerating my reality. The Boston skyline blurred outside the window of my Uber. This was the city I had called home for nearly a decade now, rapidly shrinking in my rearview mirror. I checked my watch. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. My flight to Edinburgh, Scotland was scheduled to board at 4:30. I had exactly enough time to vanish before anyone realized what had truly happened. When I arrived at Terminal E, my nanny Maria was already waiting near the international check-in desks. She was holding 6-year-old Luke by the hand, while 8-year-old Emma sat dutifully on top of our matched black luggage. Mommy Emma shrieked, launching herself into my arms the moment she spotted me. "Hey, sweetie," I murmured, burying my face in her soft hair. Luke hugged my legs, his breathing steady and clear. I had packed his asthma medications, his nebulizer, and every piece of medical documentation we owned securely in my carry-on bag. I would never let anyone make him feel weak again. "Everything went smoothly," Maria asked softly, handing me our 3 dark blue passports. "Perfectly," I said, offering her a genuine smile. "Thank you, Maria, for everything." I handed her a thick envelope containing a generous severance package and a glowing letter of recommendation. She hugged me tight, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She had lived in our house. She knew the hell I had silently endured for the past year. She knew about Harrison's late nights, Patricia's unannounced inspections, and the suffocating atmosphere of a home built on lies. Once we cleared security and settled into the business class lounge, I opened my laptop one last time on American soil. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on finding the invisible threads of deception. People often lie. Numbers simply do not. When you track the flow of money, you map the true character of a person. 7 months ago, I had noticed a discrepancy in our joint accounts. A missing $5,000 here, an unexplained hotel charge there. Harrison had always been sloppy, relying on his father's accountants to clean up his messes. But he forgot that he was married to a woman who traced offshore shell companies for a living. It took me less than 48 hours to uncover the affair with Brittany. It took me another week to uncover the full extent of the rot infecting the entire family empire. Richard's sprawling real estate firm, the source of Patricia's boundless arrogance, was bleeding out rapidly. To maintain their lavish lifestyle, Richard had been leveraging properties against each other, hiding a $15 million bad debt inside complex corporate structures. And their safety net, their golden parachute, was me. Over the years, Richard and Harrison had quietly attached my name and my immaculate credit score as a guarantor to several very highly leveraged commercial loans. They assumed I was just a dutiful, compliant wife who signed whatever thick stack of paperwork was placed in front of her. They thought I was too busy raising children, managing the household, and organizing their tedious charity galas to ever read the fine print. They were catastrophically wrong. The moment I discovered the affair 7 months ago, I did not confront Harrison. I did not throw his expensive tailored suits on the front lawn or scream at Patricia in the middle of her precious country club dining room. Taking a step back to analyze my life, I realized that blowing up my marriage with a dramatic public confrontation would only give them the opportunity to hide their assets and trap me in a messy, drawn-out legal battle. Instead, I went to war in the shadows. Over the course of 6 grueling months, I systematically dismantled their financial grip on me. I engaged a ruthless, highly discreet legal team. We quietly untangled my name from every single one of Richard's toxic commercial loans, citing fraudulent signatures and severe misrepresentation. This was not hard to prove, given Richard's famously sloppy paperwork and his arrogant habit of forging my initials to expedite banking processes. Because the loans were suddenly secured under false pretenses, the banks immediately flagged the accounts for review. But I did not stop there. A forensic accountant knows exactly what the Internal Revenue Service looks for when auditing high net worth individuals. I compiled a meticulously organized 400-page dossier detailing Richard's rampant tax evasion, his offshore dodging, and his entirely fraudulent expense reporting. I mailed it anonymously to the whistleblower office. As for the $2.5 million Beacon Hill house that I had just so generously surrendered in the divorce settlement, I knew a secret. I knew that the moment my name was removed from the primary deed, the bank would run a mandatory stress test on Harrison's standalone credit. Without my substantial income and my spotless credit history, propping him up the mortgage would instantly trigger a default clause. The foreclosure notice was likely already printed, scheduled to arrive in their mailbox by Friday afternoon. Attention passengers, we are now boarding our business class cabin for the direct flight to Edinburgh. The gate agent's voice echoed through the lounge, snapping me back to the present moment. I closed my laptop and slid it into my leather tote bag. I looked down at Emma and Luke. Emma was holding her favorite reading book, and Luke was clutching a small stuffed bear. "It is time to go, guys," I said, my voice steady and light. We walked down the jet bridge together. The air felt different here, charged with anticipation and the promise of a completely clean slate. We settled into our spacious business class pods. I helped Luke buckle his seatbelt, checking his breathing one last time. His chest rose and fell in a perfect, unbothered rhythm. He was safe. They were both safe from a family that viewed them as defective commodities rather than human beings. A flight attendant offered me a glass of sparkling water, and I accepted it gladly. I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet atmosphere of the cabin. For years, I had walked on eggshells, monitoring every single word and action to avoid setting off Patricia's temper or Harrison's fragile ego. That life was over. I sank back into the plush leather seat and pulled out my phone for the final time on American soil. I opened the family group chat. It was already blowing up with notifications. Audrey Harrison's younger sister had just posted a photo of the divorce celebration lunch they were currently having at a high-end bistro downtown. Audrey was a master of performative cruelty, a woman who lived her entire life for carefully curated social media aesthetics. The photo showed champagne glasses clinking with Brittany, front and center, heavily pregnant and glowing with unearned victory. The text beneath the photo made me smirk. "So glad the dead weight is finally gone. I cannot wait to welcome my new nephew tomorrow. Brittany is already glowing." Patricia replied immediately. "The house feels lighter already. Tomorrow is going to be a perfect day for our family." Then came a message from Jamal, Audrey's husband. "Looking forward to it." I stared at Jamal's brief message. Jamal, the quiet, impeccably dressed brother-in-law. He was the only African-American man in this overwhelmingly white, status-obsessed family. Jamal always played the role of the supportive, dignified husband to Audrey, nodding along with Patricia's snide remarks, while keeping his own hands remarkably clean. But numbers do not lie, and neither do hotel credit card authorizations. I knew exactly what Jamal was hiding, and I knew exactly what was growing inside Brittany's womb. I powered down my phone. I removed the protective case, popped out the SIM card tray, and pulled out the tiny piece of plastic that connected me to their toxic world. I dropped the SIM card into my empty water glass, watching it sink to the bottom. I did not need to see the fallout. I had orchestrated it to absolute perfection. We were going to Edinburgh. I had accepted a senior partnership at a prestigious international accounting firm months ago. I had transferred all my personal wealth, which remained completely untouched by the divorce settlement, thanks to a bulletproof post-nuptial agreement I had tricked Harrison into signing years ago into secure overseas trusts. I buckled my seatbelt as the plane engines roared to life. The aircraft taxied down the runway, gaining speed before finally lifting off the ground. As the wheels tucked away and we climbed higher into the clouds, severing my physical ties to the United States, I closed my eyes and allowed myself a genuine, peaceful smile. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the 7 members of my ex-husband's family would walk into that VIP maternity clinic expecting to crown their new king. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into a slaughterhouse. The jet engines provided a steady rhythm as we cruised over the Atlantic. I watched Emma and Luke sleep in their seats, their chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. For the first time since I married Harrison, I felt my heartbeat slow to a normal pace. The anxiety permanently lodged in my throat was finally dissolving. Looking out the window at the endless expanse of dark water below, my mind drifted back over the past 8 years. It was a period of my life defined by a relentless, suffocating pressure to conform to a standard of wealth that did not actually exist. When I first met Harrison, I was a pragmatic numbers girl from a working-class neighborhood, dazzled by his polished charm and the illusion of his family dynasty. I had blindly fallen into an intricate trap completely disguised as a romantic fairy tale. The Harrison family brand was built entirely on smoke mirrors and aggressive public relations. Richard operated his real estate empire like a medieval fiefdom, demanding absolute loyalty and projecting an image of untouchable financial supremacy. He hosted lavish charity galas, drove imported sports cars, and wore custom-tailored suits that screamed old money. But as a forensic accountant, I quickly learned to read the silence between the numbers. The absolute truth was that Richard was a terrible, fundamentally incompetent businessman. He survived on aggressive leveraging borrowing against properties that were already mortgaged to the hilt and moving cash through a labyrinth of shell companies to cover his operating losses. The elite family business was nothing more than a glorified Ponzi scheme running on fumes and family pride. Harrison was perfectly content to play the role of the princely heir, drawing an exorbitant salary for a job that consisted mostly of taking clients to golf courses and signing documents he never bothered to read. He lived in a blissful state of subsidized ignorance, entirely dependent on the crumbling empire his father desperately tried to keep afloat. Patricia was the architect of the family social hierarchy, and she wielded her approval like a weapon. In her eyes, the world was divided into people who mattered and people who served those who mattered. Audrey Harrison's younger sister was the undisputed golden child. Audrey could do no wrong even as she drifted aimlessly from one expensive hobby to another, funded entirely by Richard's dwindling credit lines. Patricia celebrated Audrey's mediocrity as if it were sheer genius while simultaneously scrutinizing my every move. I was the outsider, the utility player brought in to handle the tedious mechanics of real life, while the royals danced at the ball. Patricia never missed a chance to remind me that my background was pedestrian. If I bought a dress off the rack, she would offer a tight, pitying smile and suggest I use the family stylist. If I cooked a meal myself, she would ask why I had not simply hired a caterer. The toxicity seeped into every interaction, poisoning the air we breathed. When Luke was born with severe asthma, Patricia treated it as a personal affront to the family bloodline. She loudly lamented that my inferior genetics had tainted their perfect pedigree. Harrison never once stood up for me. He simply nodded along with his mother, retreating to his study with a glass of scotch rather than defending his own wife and son. But the emotional abuse was merely the packaging for their true objective, which was relentless financial exploitation. When the market tightened and Richard's reckless investments began to sour, they suddenly remembered my professional expertise. Under the guise of bringing me into the inner circle, they asked me to review some files to sign a few guarantor forms to help secure better interest rates using my flawless credit score. "We are building this for your children, Clara," Richard would say, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "This is how legacy families operate. We share the risk to share the reward." It was a masterful manipulation. They used my fierce protective instinct for my children against me. Over the years, I became the invisible pillar holding up their collapsing mansion. I balanced the books they destroyed, I restructured the debt they blindly accumulated, and I signed my name to commercial loans that kept their luxury vehicles in the driveway. They treated my pristine credit rating like an infinite bank account, assuming I would forever remain the quiet, dutiful accountant who was just grateful to be invited to their dinner table. They completely mistook my calculated silence for blind submission. They fatally mistook my enduring patience for inherent weakness. They never realized that a forensic accountant is trained to observe, to document, and to prepare. I spent 8 years cataloging every fraudulent tax return, every illegal transfer of corporate funds into personal accounts, and every forged signature. I mapped their entire financial ecosystem down to the last stolen dollar. While they were busy hosting cocktail parties and laughing at my expense, I was quietly building a firewall around myself and my children. The moment Harrison brought Brittany into the picture, parading her around as the new mother of the true heir, he gave me the exact cover I needed. They were so distracted by the shiny new toy, so consumed by the arrogant belief that they had finally replaced me with someone better, that they stopped watching my hands. They handed me the perfect opportunity to methodically sever the financial arteries, keeping their fraudulent lifestyle alive, without raising a single alarm. Sitting on this plane soaring high above the clouds, I felt no guilt. I had given them 8 years of my life, my loyalty, and my labor. They had repaid me with betrayal, mockery, and theft. The debt was finally settled, and now it was their turn to pay. As the flight attendants began dimming the cabin lights for our overnight journey, I allowed myself to mentally review the final brilliant stroke of my escape plan. His impending downfall was poetic justice. It all started exactly 7 months ago on a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my home office reviewing our quarterly personal expenses when a glaring anomaly caught my eye. Forensic accountants do not see numbers as static figures on a page. We see them as a narrative, a map of human behavior. Harrison had charged $4,000 to a luxury boutique hotel downtown, categorized lazily under corporate client entertainment. It was a sloppy categorization, considering his father's firm had suspended all luxury client perks a week earlier due to severe cash flow issues. I dug deeper. It took merely 3 clicks and a cross-reference with our joint credit card statements to unravel his secret life. There were expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, charges for high-end maternity wear, and a massive deposit to a private fertility clinic. The timeline was painfully clear. Harrison was not just having an affair with a 24-year-old named Brittany. He was building an entirely parallel life while I was washing his laundry and managing his children's medical appointments. Most spouses would have confronted their cheating partner immediately. They would have thrown plates, demanded answers, and wept over the betrayal. I did not shed a single tear. When you realize the person you married is nothing more than a parasite, grief is quickly replaced by a cold, calculating survival instinct. I closed the credit card statement and opened the broader financial portfolio of the Harrison family empire. If my husband was stupid enough to leave a digital trail of his infidelity on a joint account, what else were they hiding? I spent the next 48 hours executing a deep dive into Richard's commercial real estate holdings. What I found was breathtaking in its sheer audacity and incompetence. Richard was operating a financial house of cards. He had created dozens of shell companies using the inflated equity from one commercial property to secure high-interest loans for another. The market had shifted, property values had stagnated, and the entire structure was buckling. Buried beneath layers of corporate jargon and manipulated balance sheets was a staggering $15 million bad debt. It was a toxic, unpayable sum that was quietly accelerating toward a catastrophic default. And the only thing keeping the banks from calling in those loans was me. I pulled up the guarantor agreements. Richard had aggressively leveraged my immaculate credit score to secure the absolute lowest interest rates possible. My name was quietly tethered to every single failing asset in his portfolio. They were using my financial stability as a human shield. If Richard defaulted, the banks would come directly after my personal accounts, my savings, and my children's future. They planned to let me sink with their ship, while they hid whatever cash they could salvage in offshore accounts. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. I had to amputate myself from their financial corpse before the rot spread to my own life. I could not simply ask to be removed from the accounts. Richard would know I had seen the books, and Patricia would launch a legal war of attrition to freeze my assets. I had to use their own boundless arrogance against them. I immediately contacted an independent, highly specialized corporate attorney who had no ties to Boston high society. Together, we crafted a surgical exit strategy. The key to breaking my liability lay in Richard's own arrogant negligence. Over the years, he had frequently forged my initials on routine loan renewals to save time, assuming I would never audit my own father-in-law. He had unwittingly handed me the exact legal loophole I needed to destroy him. My attorney drafted formal declarations of fraudulent representation and unauthorized signatures. We filed these directly with the compliance departments of the three major banks holding Richard's loans. We did it quietly, bypassing the local loan officers Richard usually bribed with country club dinners, and went straight to the federal compliance oversight teams. The moment a bank receives a credible allegation of forged guarantor signatures, federal banking regulations require them to instantly sever the contested liability to avoid massive compliance fines. Within 30 days, my name was entirely wiped from the $15 million toxic debt. The banks immediately flagged Richard's accounts for high-risk review, but corporate audits take months to process. Richard remained completely oblivious. He thought the occasional bank inquiry was just routine paperwork. Next, I had to secure my personal wealth. Early in our marriage, when Harrison was still pretending to be a self-made man, I had drafted a post-nuptial agreement. I had presented it to him as a tax optimization strategy, masking the ironclad asset protection clauses under layers of boring accounting jargon. Harrison, eager to get back to his golf game, had signed it without reading past the first page. That document legally walled off my business income, my investments, and my personal savings from any marital dispute. With the post-nuptial agreement activated, I systematically drained my exposed capital. I liquidated my domestic stock portfolios and transferred every available dollar into an untouchable encrypted overseas trust based in Edinburgh. I left exactly enough money in the joint checking account to cover the utility bills and groceries, maintaining the perfect illusion of domestic normalcy. By the time Harrison walked into the kitchen 2 months ago and casually announced he wanted a divorce because he had outgrown our marriage, my financial extraction was already 100% complete. He stood by the granite island adjusting his expensive tie and told me that Brittany was pregnant with the true heir. He offered me the insulting $100,000 settlement and demanded I sign away the Beacon Hill house. He thought he was discarding a helpless dependent wife. He had no idea he was demanding the deed to a property that was already doomed. The bank was currently finalizing the foreclosure paperwork, because without my credit serving as the foundation, Richard's empire could no longer sustain the mortgage. I had smiled at Harrison that morning, playing the role of the defeated woman to absolute perfection. I nodded submissively, packed my bags, and agreed to his terms. I let them believe they had outsmarted me. I let them gather their entire family for their grand victory lap at the maternity clinic. My financial web was severed, my children were safe, and my escape was secured. Now all I had to do was sit back and let their own catastrophic choices deliver the final blow. The final blow was not just a matter of removing my credit history. It was about exposing the rot at the very core of their existence. Richard had spent decades evading federal taxes, padding his lavish lifestyle with money stolen directly from the government. He used phantom contractors to artificially inflate renovation costs on his commercial properties, drastically lowering his capital gains. He wrote off Patricia's luxury shopping sprees to Milan and Paris as vital corporate scouting trips. He even claimed Audrey's massive monthly allowance as a consulting fee for a marketing firm that literally did not exist. For a forensic accountant, untangling Richard's tax fraud was like reading a brightly colored children's book. The sheer arrogance of his methods left a paper trail so wide and luminous that it practically begged for a federal audit. I spent my evenings over those 6 months compiling a meticulously indexed 400-page dossier. I highlighted every single illegal deduction, mapped out every offshore tax shelter, and cross-referenced every manipulated depreciation schedule. I bound it in simple black folders and mailed it directly to the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower office. The federal government does not send polite warning letters when they receive airtight, undeniable evidence of a $15 million tax evasion scheme. They act with absolute terrifying precision. They freeze accounts. They seize assets. They lock down every penny before the targets even realize they are under a criminal investigation. Furthermore, by filing officially as a whistleblower, I was legally entitled to a percentage of the recovered funds. I was not just destroying their empire, I was going to be paid handsomely by the federal government for taking out the trash. And because of my carefully executed legal detachment, the IRS would look right past me and aim their heavy artillery squarely at Richard and Harrison. But the true masterpiece of my departure was the $2.5 million Beacon Hill mansion. During the divorce negotiations, Harrison and Patricia had fought tooth and nail to retain full ownership of the property. Patricia had practically gloated about keeping the custom Italian marble counters and the imported French chandeliers I had picked out. They firmly believed they were robbing me of a prime real estate asset. In reality, they were violently fighting over the steering wheel of a sinking ship. 5 years ago, Richard convinced Harrison to refinance the mansion, using an adjustable-rate mortgage to free up cash for a failing commercial venture. Because Harrison had no verifiable independent income that could ever satisfy the bank's strict underwriters, they had heavily relied on my pristine financial history as the primary guarantor. The precise moment I signed that divorce decree and my lawyer filed the paperwork to dissolve my financial connection to the marriage, the bank's automated monitoring systems would instantly flag the mortgage. Without my 6-figure salary and my 820 credit score shielding the account, Harrison's debt-to-income ratio would immediately trigger a default clause. The bank would instantly demand the outstanding loan balance in full or initiate rapid foreclosure proceedings. That automated certified letter was already moving through the postal system, destined to land in their polished brass mailbox by Friday afternoon. They were eagerly trading a $100,000 settlement check for a multi-million-dollar foreclosure that would completely obliterate what was left of Harrison's financial standing. Meanwhile, my own legitimate wealth was perfectly insulated from the coming blast. The post-nuptial agreement Harrison had blindly signed years ago ensured that every dollar I earned from my private consulting contracts remained strictly mine. Over the last several weeks, I had quietly initiated a series of staggered, untraceable wire transfers. I liquidated my domestic stock portfolios and moved the capital into a highly secure, heavily encrypted trust account based in Edinburgh. I left exactly enough money in the Boston joint checking account to cover the upcoming utility bills and a week's worth of basic groceries, maintaining the perfect illusion of a naive, compliant wife right up until the very moment I walked out the conference room door. My financial extraction was a complete ghost operation. I left absolutely no trace, no forwarding address, and no warning. I looked down at the screen of my laptop. The digital flight map showed our planes smoothly passing over the dark, freezing waters of the North Atlantic. I closed the computer and placed it securely in the seat pocket in front of me. The flight attendants walked softly down the carpeted aisles, dimming the main cabin lights and offering warm blankets to the sleeping passengers. I reclined my leather seat into a flat bed, pulling the soft duvet over my shoulders. I listened to the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Emma and Luke beside me. They were completely safe. I had successfully navigated us out of a toxic wasteland without ever raising my voice or losing my composure. As I lay there in the quiet hum of the aircraft, I pictured the scene that would inevitably unfold in Boston the following morning. I pictured Patricia eagerly laying out her expensive designer clothes, anxious to celebrate her new grandson. I pictured Harrison staring at himself in the bathroom mirror, feeling like a victorious king who had successfully upgraded his life. I pictured Richard boasting to his sycophantic golf buddies about securing his family legacy. They were all completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. They firmly thought they had discarded a weak, irrelevant woman who would quietly disappear into poverty. They had absolutely no idea that the foundation of their entire existence had already been demolished, and gravity was just waiting to take effect. I closed my eyes and let sleep wash over me, knowing that when the sun rose, the Harrison family empire would cease to exist. The morning sun broke across the Boston skyline, casting long, sharp shadows over the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill. The city awoke with its usual brisk energy, entirely indifferent to the catastrophic shift about to occur within one of its most self-important families. At exactly 8:45, a pair of gleaming black SUVs pulled up to the valet stand of the Horizon 5 IP maternity clinic. The facility was an exclusive ultra-modern medical center catering strictly to the wealthiest residents of Massachusetts. It featured private entrances, catered waiting rooms, and doctors who charged exorbitant retainer fees just to keep their cell phones on at night. This was exactly the kind of sterile, high-status environment where the family felt most at home. Richard stepped out of the lead vehicle, first tossing his keys to the valet with a practiced flick of his wrist. He adjusted his expensive wool coat, puffing out his chest as he surveyed the glass facade of the building. To anyone passing by, he looked like a titan of industry, a man completely in control of his vast real estate empire. He wore his arrogance like a second skin, completely oblivious to the fact that federal investigators were likely already reviewing the explosive financial dossier sitting on a desk in Washington. Patricia emerged from the passenger side, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She wore a tailored beige suit and clutched a thick monogrammed leather portfolio tightly against her chest. Inside that portfolio rested the legal documents required to transfer $5 million into a newly established trust fund. She patted the leather affectionately, her face flushed with the thrill of total victory. She had spent the entire car ride gloating about how smoothly the divorce proceedings had gone, mocking my quick departure, and celebrating the removal of what she called the dead weight, dragging down their bloodline. From the second SUV, Harrison emerged. He quickly walked around to the passenger side, opening the door with a theatrical display of chivalry. Brittany stepped out, her hand resting heavily on her 5-month baby bump. She wore a tight designer maternity dress clearly purchased on the joint credit card I had already canceled. The morning sunlight caught the massive 4-carat cushion-cut diamond on her ring finger, sending fractured rainbows dancing across the pavement. She beamed at Harrison, playing the role of the glowing, triumphant mother-to-be with absolute perfection. Behind them came Audrey, Harrison's younger sister. She did not even bother greeting the valet. Her phone was already out, held high at arm's length, as she meticulously documented the grand arrival for her social media followers. She adjusted her hair, flashing a brilliant, entirely manufactured smile at the camera lens while narrating their monumental family milestone. Walking quietly beside Audrey was her husband Jamal. A tall, impeccably dressed African-American man, Jamal moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that sharply contrasted with the chaotic, loud energy of his in-laws. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and kept his hands resting casually in his pockets. Jamal was the master of playing the supportive background character. He always nodded at Patricia's snide remarks and offered polite, measured responses to Richard's boasting. Today was no different. His face was a mask of serene composure, revealing absolutely nothing of the devastating secret he held. He offered a polite nod to the clinic staff at the door, his eyes completely unreadable, as he followed his wife into the building. The family congregated in the expansive marble-floored lobby of the clinic. A man in a sharp pinstripe suit rose from a waiting chair and approached them. It was their family attorney, the man tasked with overseeing the legal execution of the trust fund transfer. He shook Richard's hand enthusiastically, then turned to Patricia. "Everything is finalized and ready for your signature," Patricia, the lawyer, said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. "The trust accounts are primed. The moment the doctor confirms the genetic screening and gives the baby a clean bill of health, we can execute the transfer immediately. It is a seamless process from there." "Excellent," Patricia replied, her voice carrying an air of absolute royalty. "A healthy baby boy is exactly what this family needs. A strong heir to carry the name forward. We have waited entirely too long to secure our legacy." Harrison puffed out his chest, wrapping his arms securely around Brittany's waist. He is going to be perfect, Mom. Brittany comes from great athletic stock. We will not have to deal with any of the weakness we saw in the past. This kid is going to be a powerhouse. Brittany giggled, leaning into his embrace. He kicks so hard already, babe. I just know he's going to be a champion. The group moved toward the private VIP elevators, demanding the space entirely for themselves. The clinic staff, well accustomed to the demanding nature of elite clients, quickly ushered them upward to the premium consultation suites. The doors slid shut, sealing the 7 of them inside the mirrored box. The atmosphere was intoxicatingly arrogant. They were high on their own perceived brilliance, deeply convinced that they had executed the perfect transition of power. They had successfully discarded the boring middle-class accountant and upgraded to a younger, more compliant model who was providing them with their ultimate prize. Audrey continued to record, capturing the smug smiles of her parents and the joyous laughter of her brother. She proudly announced to her digital audience that today marked a brand new, glorious chapter for their dynasty. Jamal stood in the back corner of the elevator, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. He offered a small, polite smile when Audrey turned the camera toward him, playing his part to perfection. The elevator chimed, announcing their arrival at the top floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, luxuriously appointed waiting area. Soft, classical music played from hidden speakers, and plush leather sofas offered an inviting place to rest. The receptionist immediately stood up, recognizing the family name, and offered them premium bottled water and espresso. They settled into this waiting area like conquering monarchs claiming their new throne. Patricia placed the leather portfolio containing the $5 million trust documents directly on the glass coffee table in front of her. She tapped her fingers against the leather, eager to sign her name and officially secure the future of the family empire. They were completely insulated by their boundless hubris, fully believing that they had won the war. They had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet had already vanished. Audrey threw herself onto the oversized velvet sofa, immediately adjusting the portable lighting ring attached to her phone case. The harsh, bright LED glow illuminated her perfectly contoured face as she hit record for the 4th time that morning. She panned the camera across the luxurious waiting area, intentionally capturing the expensive abstract art on the walls and the silver espresso machine humming in the corner. She wanted her thousands of followers to know exactly how elite this medical facility was. "Good morning, everyone," Audrey purred into the camera, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "We are officially at the clinic. Today is the day we confirm the newest, most perfect addition to our family. The true heir is almost here, and we could not be more thrilled. Brittany is glowing. Harrison is ecstatic, and my parents are literally crying with joy. Stay tuned for updates." She tapped the screen to upload the video immediately, layering it with a barrage of hashtags celebrating family new beginnings and luxury lifestyles. Audrey operated her social media accounts as if she were a celebrity influencer, despite the fact that her entire online existence was funded by Richard. Her lavish wardrobe, her weekly spa treatments, and her frequent trips to Aspen were all written off as consulting fees for a marketing firm that produced absolutely no actual work. I knew this because I had audited the fraudulent invoices myself. She lived in a complete fantasy world, sustained entirely by the financial fraud I had just handed over to the federal government. With the video posted, Audrey turned her attention back to the room. She looked at Brittany, who was sipping a sparkling water and basking in the undivided attention of her future in-laws. "You know, Brittany," Audrey said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "you really are the best thing that has ever happened to my brother. The energy in the family is just so much better now. It is like a dark cloud has finally lifted." Patricia nodded vigorously in agreement, carefully adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. "A dark cloud is exactly right, Audrey. Clara always brought such a depressing, heavy atmosphere to every family event. She never knew how to engage with our social circle. I swear, every time we hosted a charity gala, I had to practically beg her to wear something appropriate. She always looked like she belonged behind a reception desk, not at the head table." Brittany offered a sympathetic, deeply patronizing smile. "I cannot even imagine dealing with that for 8 years." Harrison told me she used to spend her weekends reading tax laws instead of going to the country club. It is just so sad. But do not worry, Patricia. I already contacted a premier interior designer. We are completely gutting the Beacon Hill house. Every single trace of her boring pedestrian taste is going straight into a dumpster by next week. That is my girl, Harrison cheered, kissing Brittany on the cheek. Out with the old, in with the better. The performative cruelty was staggering. They were not just moving on from an 8-year marriage, they were actively trying to erase my entire existence from their history. They spoke about me as if I were a pest control problem they had finally resolved. They completely ignored the fact that my boring pedestrian habit of reading tax laws was the only reason their fraudulent commercial properties had not been seized by federal agents 5 years ago. They were cheerfully discussing redecorating a mansion that was currently marching toward a brutal, highly publicized foreclosure. Standing quietly near the floor-to-ceiling windows, completely detached from the vicious gossip, was Jamal. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his posture impeccably straight, his hands resting casually in his pockets. He looked out over the Boston skyline, an expression of serene indifference painted across his handsome face. Jamal was a master class in quiet observation. He never interrupted Patricia when she went on her elitist rants. He never challenged Richard when the older man made culturally insensitive jokes disguised as business advice. Jamal simply smiled, nodded, and played the role of the grateful, supportive brother-in-law. Audrey pointed her phone at him, launching a live video broadcast. And here is my amazing husband, Jamal, the best uncle-to-be. Are you excited for the new baby, babe? Jamal turned from the window, offering the camera a flawless megawatt smile. I am incredibly excited, Audrey. This family is about to experience a day they will never, ever forget. I would not miss this moment for anything in the world. His voice was smooth, rich, and entirely devoid of sarcasm. Audrey giggled, completely missing the loaded double meaning behind his words. She ended the broadcast and returned to scrolling through her notifications, eager to see how many people were validating her perfect life. Jamal turned his gaze back to the window, the smile instantly dropping from his face. The reflection in the glass showed a man who was acutely aware of the ticking clock. He knew exactly what was growing inside Brittany. He knew the biological impossibility that was about to be laid bare on a sterilized medical table. While Harrison boasted about his athletic genetics and Patricia daydreamed about her $5 million trust fund, Jamal stood in the corner silently counting down the minutes until the explosion. He was a man who had tolerated their condescension and their subtle, insidious racism for years. He had sat at their dining table eating their expensive food while they treated him as a token of their progressive tolerance. He had played their game flawlessly, and now he was simply waiting for the doctor to walk through those heavy wooden doors and deliver the final devastating blow to the Harrison family bloodline. Patricia picked up her leather portfolio again, her manicured fingers drumming excitedly against the cover. I hope Dr. Evans hurries up. I have a celebratory lunch scheduled at the club at noon, and I want these trust documents officially filed before we order the champagne. Patience. Mom Harrison chuckled, resting his hand proudly on Brittany's stomach. Greatness takes time. Yes. Jamal looked at Harrison, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touching the corner of his mouth. He checked his watch one more time, his calm demeanor hiding a storm of anticipation. The trap was fully set, the actors were all in their places, and the curtain was about to rise. A heavy oak door across the suite clicked open. Instead of the doctor, a junior nurse stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with fresh crystal glasses and sparkling water. She moved with quiet efficiency, pouring drinks before slipping back out. The brief interruption only heightened the electric anticipation buzzing through the room. Patricia used the moment to formally withdraw a thick stack of legal papers from her monogrammed portfolio. She laid them perfectly flat on the glass coffee table. The crisp white pages bore the official seal of the family's wealth management firm. Beside the documents, she placed a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. It was a ceremonial object reserved for major acquisitions and estate transfers. This right here is the absolute cornerstone of our future, Patricia announced, her voice echoing with profound self-importance. $5 million in fully vested assets structured into an irrevocable trust. The moment Dr. Evans confirms this boy is perfectly healthy, my signature goes right here. She pointed a manicured finger at the bottom of the final page. I had my legal team draft this specifically to ensure no outside parties can ever touch it, Richard added, taking a slow, satisfied sip of his sparkling water. This money is exclusively for Harrison's true heir. It skips the usual marital asset complications. We learned our lesson with Clara. We are building an impenetrable financial fortress around this child. Harrison leaned against the edge of the examination table, crossing his arms and projecting the image of a seasoned patriarch. It is exactly what he deserves, Dad. I am just relieved we handled the trash removal so efficiently this morning. I expected Clara to put up more of a fight over the Beacon Hill house. Instead, she just took that pathetic check and ran like a coward. She knew she was entirely out of her depth. Patricia scoffed affectionately, smoothing the edge of the trust document. Clara never understood how true wealth actually operates. She was always hoarding coupons and agonizing over household budgets like a common peasant. She lacked the vision required to exist in our world. I always said she was a genetic and social dead end. Look at the children she produced. Emma has absolutely no presence, and Luke is practically allergic to oxygen. Brittany dramatically placed a protective hand over her swelling stomach, sighing with exaggerated sympathy. It really is a tragedy that Harrison had to endure that for nearly a decade. But we are fixing everything now. Our son is going to have the absolute best of everything. I was looking at elite preschools in Switzerland just last night. The waiting lists are terrible, but with a $5 million trust backing him, I am sure they can make an exception for us. Of course they will, Audrey chimed in, barely looking up from her bright phone screen. We are Harrisons. We do not wait in lines for anything. She aggressively typed out another text message, likely alerting her country club friends about the impending financial transfer. By the way, Mom, are you completely cutting Emma and Luke out of the primary estate? Patricia did not even hesitate. They will receive a modest educational stipend when they turn 18, assuming Clara does not squander it first. But the vast bulk of the generational wealth belongs to the strong branches of the family tree. This new baby is our fresh start. He is the future. Jamal remained completely motionless by the window, his dark eyes tracking the conversation like a predator watching an oblivious herd of gazelles. He watched Patricia hover excitedly over the gold pen. He watched Richard boast about his supposedly impenetrable wealth management firm. He watched Harrison take full credit for a financial masterstroke that was actually a catastrophic failure. Not a single person in that room realized that the $5 million Patricia was so eager to sign away did not actually exist anymore. They did not know that Richard had quietly leveraged those specific estate funds to cover the bleeding interest payments on his collapsing commercial properties 3 months ago. The paper sitting on the glass table was entirely worthless. It was a phantom contract drawing upon phantom money. But Jamal did not need to know the intricate details of my forensic accounting trap to know that their arrogance was about to be violently dismantled. He had his own explosive charge securely planted directly beneath the foundation of their entire bloodline. He knew exactly what the genetic markers would show. He knew that the very DNA of the child they were praising was going to shatter their elitist worldview into a million irreparable pieces. He offered a polite, encouraging nod to Brittany. "You look absolutely radiant today, Brittany," Jamal said, his voice perfectly modulated to sound like a supportive family member. "Motherhood clearly suits you." Brittany beamed at the compliment, tossing her long blonde hair over her shoulder. "Thank you, Jamal. I really feel like I was born to do this. Harrison has been taking such amazing care of me. We are just so incredibly blessed." "Blessed is certainly one word for it," Jamal replied smoothly, turning his gaze back to the sprawling Boston skyline. The sheer magnitude of their collective delusion was staggering. Here was a family sitting in the absolute pinnacle of luxury, celebrating their own perceived superiority. They were loudly congratulating themselves for discarding a loyal wife and 2 innocent children. They were gloating over a real estate empire that was currently being seized by federal agents. They were excitedly transferring fake money into a fake trust fund, and above all else, they were worshipping a child that belonged to the very man standing quietly in the corner of the room. Patricia picked up the gold pen, testing its heavy weight in her hand. She held it just inches above the signature line, hovering in a state of suspended anticipation. "I want the doctor to see this," she declared. "I want Dr. Evans to witness the exact moment we secure the Harrison legacy. It makes it all the more official." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors to the consultation suite swung open again. This time, the crisp rustle of a white medical coat announced the arrival of the man they had all been eagerly waiting for. Dr. Evans walked into the room carrying a thick medical file. His demeanor was distinctly different from the cheerful, congratulatory tone he had displayed during the earlier ultrasound. His shoulders were slightly rigid, and his eyes remained fixed firmly on the floor as he approached the center of the room. He did not look at the proud grandfather. He did not look at the glowing mother-to-be. He did not look at the gold pen resting in Patricia's hand. He simply stood at the end of the examination table, clutching the genetic screening results like a heavy anchor. The room grew entirely silent, the family's arrogant chatter instantly evaporating as they noticed the severe, unsmiling expression on the doctor's face. The stage was finally set. The audience was captive. The destruction was imminent. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, the dry sound breaking the heavy silence that had suddenly descended upon the luxurious consultation room. He looked up from the thick medical file, forcing his features to relax into a carefully measured professional expression. He knew his wealthy clients required a certain level of bedside manner, especially when they were paying premium retainer fees for his exclusive services. The tension in the suite was palpable, thick with the family's arrogant expectation of absolute perfection. They demanded flawless results, just as they demanded flawless service at their country clubs. Dr. Evans took a slow, calculated breath, deciding to momentarily appease their towering egos before delivering the unalterable medical truth. "Let us start with this baseline developmental metrics," Dr. Evans said. His voice projected a calm, authoritative resonance that immediately put the anxious room at ease. He opened the dense manila folder, revealing several pages of complex medical data and high-resolution imaging charts. "The anatomical growth is exactly where we want it to be at 20 weeks gestation. The spinal development is flawless. The fetal heart rate is strong, steady, and perfectly rhythmic. All major internal organs are forming exactly on schedule, without any visible structural defects." Harrison puffed his chest out, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He looked around the room, as if he had personally engineered the baby's cellular development. "I knew it," he declared, squeezing Brittany's hand with aggressive pride. "Nothing but the absolute best. A true Harrison." "And the gender?" Patricia asked urgently. Her fingers gripped the heavy gold fountain pen, hovering anxiously over the $5 million trust document. "We are certain it is a boy. We need absolute verification before I sign these legal transfers." Dr. Evans nodded, offering a tight, obligatory smile. "The chromosomal analysis confirms it with absolute medical certainty. You are having a boy." The room immediately erupted into a chaotic chorus of elite self-congratulation. Richard let out a booming theatrical laugh, clapping Harrison on the back with such aggressive force it made the younger man stumble forward half a step. Patricia clasped her manicured hands together in pure ecstasy, her eyes shining with the distinct thrill of secured generational power. Audrey squealed loudly instantly, raising her smartphone to record her own reaction for her thousands of online followers, eagerly narrating the glorious victory of the new family heir. Brittany preened beneath the bright clinical lights, adjusting her posture on the examination table to maximize her glowing maternal image. Jamal stood perfectly still by the expansive glass window. He did not clap. He did not cheer. He did not offer a single word of congratulation. He simply maintained his serene, polite smile, watching the arrogant circus unfold with the detached, cold amusement of a man holding a hidden detonator. "This is the greatest day in the history of our family," Patricia announced. Her voice trembled with overwhelming self-importance. She positioned the sharp tip of the gold pen directly over the signature line of the thick legal document. Dr. Evans, your confirmation was the final piece we needed today. I am executing this massive financial transfer right now to protect my grandson. Mrs. Harrison, please wait, Dr. Evans said. His voice was no longer accommodating or gentle. It was sharp, carrying an urgent clinical weight that instantly froze Patricia's hand in mid-air. The celebratory atmosphere vanished in an absolute instant, replaced by a sudden suffocating chill. The air in the consultation suite felt as if it had been violently sucked through the ventilation vents. Richard stopped laughing mid-chuckle. Harrison's triumphant smile collapsed into a defensive, confused scowl. Audrey slowly lowered her expensive phone, her thumb hovering uncertainly over the bright red record button. Dr. Evans flipped past the initial growth charts to the deeper, far more complex sections of the non-invasive prenatal testing report. The crisp, sharp rustle of the heavy paper was the only sound echoing in the silent room. He took a deep breath, looking directly at Harrison and then slowly shifting his gaze toward Brittany. The expanded NIPT is an incredibly sophisticated screening tool. Dr. Evans began, his tone slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of emotion. It does not just tell us the gender or check for common chromosomal abnormalities like Down syndrome. We ordered the comprehensive expanded genetic panel precisely per your family's explicit request for the absolute highest tier of specialized medical care available. We wanted the best. Harrison interrupted, his tone laced with rising irritation and fragile ego. We paid for the best. What is the problem? You just said my son is perfectly healthy. Your baby is currently developing normally. Dr. Evans clarified, choosing his words with surgical precision to avoid any immediate panic. However, the expanded genetic panel flags highly specific hereditary markers. It screens for recessive traits that are passed down directly from the biological parents. When a specific genetic marker is flagged by the laboratory, it is my strict medical and ethical obligation to discuss the biological implications with the parents immediately. Patricia scoffed loudly, dropping the heavy gold pen onto the glass coffee table with a sharp, ringing clatter. Genetic markers. That is completely absurd. The Harrison bloodline is absolutely impeccable. We do not have a history of any genetic diseases or weaknesses. If there is an anomaly on that paper, it must be a ridiculous laboratory error. Brittany shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, pulling the thin paper sheet slightly higher over her exposed stomach. Her previously glowing, victorious complexion suddenly turned a sickly shade of pale gray. "Is something wrong with my baby?" she asked, her voice tight with rising panic. "My family does not have any health problems at all. We are totally normal." Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses, his tired eyes locked firmly onto the dense rows of genetic sequencing data. Genetics simply did not care about offshore bank accounts, bloated trust funds, or exclusive country club memberships. DNA is an uncompromising ledger of absolute truth, immune to manipulation, bribery, or public relations spin. Dr. Evans tapped his index finger against the edge of the open file, choosing his next words with the utmost caution. He had delivered bad news to powerful people before, but this particular medical anomaly defied standard clinical logic given the couple sitting in front of him. The laboratory ran a comprehensive genetic screen on the fetal DNA, extracted from Brittany's blood sample. Dr. Evans explained, keeping his voice carefully neutral. The results clearly indicate that the fetus is a carrier for the sickle cell trait. A profound, echoing silence filled the luxurious consultation suite. The medical term hung heavily in the sterilized air, completely alien to the Harrison family's carefully curated vocabulary. Richard blinked, his thick brow furrowing, as he struggled to process the information. Patricia withdrew her hand from the trust document, as if the paper had suddenly caught fire. Harrison looked entirely bewildered, staring at the doctor as if the man had just started speaking a foreign language. "Sickle cell trait," Harrison repeated, his tone laced with a mixture of aggressive skepticism and arrogant dismissal. "What on earth are you talking about, Dr. Evans? Neither Brittany nor I have any history of whatever that is. We submitted our complete family medical histories to this clinic when we registered. We are perfectly healthy. We only associate with healthy people. I understand this is unexpected." Dr. Evans continued, holding his ground against the rising tide of hostility. Sickle cell trait occurs when a child inherits one sickle cell gene and one normal gene. It is not the full disease, but rather a carrier status. The baby will live a normal, healthy life. The medical concern is not the immediate health of the child. The medical concern from a purely genetic standpoint is how the child acquired the trait in the first place. Brittany sat up straighter on the examination table. She pulled her designer maternity dress down over her knees, her blue eyes darting frantically between Harrison and the doctor. "I do not understand," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "How does a baby get it if we do not have it? Did you do something wrong during the test? Did the clinic contaminate my blood sample?" Dr. Evans shook his head firmly. "There was no contamination, Brittany. The laboratory operates under the strictest federal protocols. When they flagged this specific genetic marker, I immediately ordered them to rerun the entire sequencing panel to verify the findings. They processed the secondary sample twice. The results are absolute and medically undeniable. The baby is a carrier of the sickle cell trait." Patricia stood up from the plush leather sofa. Her tailored beige suit rustled sharply in the quiet room. "This is completely unacceptable," she demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at the doctor. "You are telling me my grandson carries a genetic mutation. We pay this clinic hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure absolute perfection. You need to fix this error immediately. We do not carry defective genes in our bloodline. You will recall that we specifically divorced my former daughter-in-law to rid ourselves of genetic weaknesses." "Mrs. Harrison, this is not an error that can be fixed." Dr. Evans stated, his professional patience beginning to wear thin against their relentless arrogance. "It is a biological fact written directly into the chromosomal makeup of the fetus, and that is precisely where the medical discrepancy lies." He took a deliberate step back from the examination table, crossing his arms over his white coat. "Sickle cell trait is a highly specific genetic marker." Dr. Evans explained, his gaze moving slowly from Harrison to Brittany. "It is a hereditary condition predominantly found in populations of African Mediterranean or Middle Eastern descent. It is extraordinarily rare in individuals of exclusively Northern European Caucasian ancestry. For a child to carry the sickle cell trait, it is an absolute biological requirement that at least one of the biological parents must carry the genetic marker and pass it down." The doctor stopped speaking. He let the undeniable weight of the medical science crash into the room. He looked at Harrison, a man with pale skin, light brown hair, and distinctly Northern European features. He looked at Brittany, a woman with bright blonde hair, pale skin, and striking blue eyes. Two Caucasian parents expecting a child who carried a genetic trait inextricably linked to a completely different demographic. Harrison let out a loud, mocking laugh, throwing his hands up in the air in an exaggerated display of outrage. "This is a joke," he declared, looking around the room for validation from his powerful father. "This is a complete scam. You are looking at two white people, Doc. My family traces its lineage back to the Mayflower. Brittany's family is from a tiny farming town in the Midwest. Neither of us has a single drop of African or Middle Eastern blood in our entire genetic history. Your expensive laboratory completely botched the test. You mixed up my son's DNA with someone else's. I will sue this clinic for every penny it has for trying to pass off faulty medical records on my family." "I assure you there was no mix-up," Dr. Evans replied firmly, tapping the thick file on the counter. "The fetal DNA matched the maternal DNA extracted from Brittany's blood sample with 99.9% certainty. We know unequivocally that this is her biological child. The maternal genetic contribution is absolute. The anomaly lies entirely within the paternal genetic contribution." "What exactly are you implying?" Richard roared, stepping forward to defend his son's honor. His face flushed a dark, angry red, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. "Are you standing there accusing my son of not being the father of his own child? Are you accusing my future daughter-in-law of infidelity right in front of her family?" "I am not making accusations, Mr. Harrison," Dr. Evans replied, his voice remaining totally clinical and detached. "I am simply presenting the biological facts. The genetics of the fetus contain a hereditary marker that cannot be biologically reconciled with Harrison's genetic profile. As your physician, it is my duty to inform you that based on the irrefutable results of the expanded NIPT screening, it is genetically impossible for Harrison to be the biological father of this child. The words struck the room like a physical shockwave. The absolute certainty of the doctor's statement shattered the family's impenetrable bubble of arrogance. The silence that followed was agonizing, deafening, and suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. The air grew stagnant as the horrifying truth began to permeate their self-righteous minds. The perfect heir, the $5 million trust fund baby, the triumphant replacement for the boring accountant and her defective children, was a complete biological fraud. Harrison turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and wild, locking onto Brittany. The proud, triumphant smirk he had worn since walking into the clinic melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "Babe, tell him he is wrong," Harrison demanded, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of a reality he was completely unequipped to handle. "Tell the doctor he made a mistake. Tell my parents this is just a stupid medical error." Brittany opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat worked frantically as she swallowed hard. The thick layers of artificial confidence she had worn into the clinic vanished in an instant, leaving behind a terrified 24-year-old girl who had just been caught in the ultimate grift. She shrank back against the examination table, her knuckles turning white as she clutched the thin paper sheet to her chest. "Brittany." Patricia snapped, her voice cracking like a leather whip across the quiet room. "Answer him immediately. Explain this right now." "I do not know." Brittany stammered, her voice thin and trembling. "I swear to you, Harrison. I swear I have not been with anyone else. It has to be a mistake. The lab messed up. They swapped the vials. You know how these places are. They mix things up all the time. It is a hospital error." Dr. Evans did not flinch. He had navigated the turbulent waters of wealthy families and their scandals for decades, and he knew that allowing any room for doubt would only prolong the agony. He stepped forward, placing the open folder directly onto the sterile counter so the undeniable data was visible to everyone in the room. "There was no mix-up," Dr. Evans reiterated firmly. "As I stated, we ran the sequence twice to completely rule out any possibility of laboratory error. The genetic markers are absolutely conclusive. The maternal DNA is a perfect match to you, Brittany. But the paternal DNA carries a sequence that Harrison simply does not possess. It is biologically impossible for this child to be yours, Harrison. The science is absolute." The finality of the doctor's words hit the room with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. The word impossible hung heavily in the air, echoing off the cold medical equipment and the expensive artwork on the walls. It was a word the Harrison family rarely heard and never accepted. They were accustomed to buying their way out of inconveniences, manipulating facts to suit their narratives, and crushing anyone who dared to oppose their version of reality. But they could not bribe a chromosomal sequence. They could not threaten a strand of DNA into submission. Richard staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. The booming authoritative patriarch who just minutes ago had been boasting about securing his family dynasty now looked entirely hollowed out. He reached out to steady himself against the wall, his chest heaving as the implications crashed over him. He had alienated his loyal daughter-in-law, abandoned his own grandchildren, and risked extreme public humiliation, all to secure a bastard child that did not even carry a single drop of his blood. Patricia stood frozen like a statue carved from ice. Her eyes were wide fixed on the manila envelope resting on the glass coffee table. The $5 million trust document. Just moments ago, it had been her ultimate weapon, the instrument of my complete erasure. Now it was a glaring monument to her own spectacular gullibility. She had been eager to hand over a fortune to a woman who had played her for an absolute fool. The realization that she, Patricia Harrison, the undisputed queen of Boston elite social circles, had been so easily conned, made her physically sick. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Audrey remained frozen near the foot of the bed. Her smartphone was still clutched tightly in her hand, the screen glowing brightly in the tense room. She had spent the entire morning curating the perfect digital narrative of her family triumph. Now she was standing on ground zero of the most humiliating scandal her social circle would ever witness. She slowly lowered the device, her perfectly contoured face pale and stricken. The performative cruelty she had displayed earlier was entirely extinguished, replaced by a raw, suffocating panic. Harrison stepped away from the examination table, putting physical distance between himself and Brittany. He looked down at his hands as if he no longer recognized them. His entire identity was wrapped up in his family name, his perceived virility, and his arrogant assumption that he commanded the loyalty of everyone around him. He had thrown away an 8-year marriage and 2 children because he firmly believed he was entitled to a perfect, uncomplicated heir. He had traded gold for dirt, and the realization was completely paralyzing him. "Who is it?" Harrison whispered. His voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant boom. It was a fragile, broken sound. "If it is not mine, then whose is it?" "Harrison." "Please, you have to believe me!" Brittany cried, fresh tears spilling over her mascara, leaving dark streaks down her pale cheeks. "I only wanted you. I only love you." "It was a mistake. It meant nothing. I swear to God it meant absolutely nothing." Her desperate, panicked confession was the final nail in the coffin. It was a complete admission of guilt. She stopped trying to blame the clinic. She stopped claiming the lab made an error. She had just admitted in front of the entire Harrison family that she had slept with someone else. The agonizing silence that swept through the clinic room following her admission was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the atmosphere. No one yelled, no one threw anything. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was too massive to process through immediate violence. It was the sound of a dynasty collapsing inward, crushed by the weight of its own unmitigated hubris. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a judge gavel striking the bench, marking the absolute end of their meticulously crafted facade. The low mechanical hum of the ultrasound machine in the background served as a mocking reminder of the celebration that had taken place just 5 minutes prior. They had arrived as conquerors. They were now standing as absolute fools. In that crushing silence, the wheels of consequence began to turn. Patricia's entire social identity was tied to this child. Richard's distraction from his crumbling real estate empire was entirely centered on this new heir. Harrison's justification for abandoning his family was built solely on the promise of this baby. And now the foundation of their future was exposed as a complete and utter fraud. The doctor stood quietly by the counter, knowing better than to intervene in the profound destruction of a powerful family. He kept his eyes averted, allowing the silence to stretch and deepen. The quiet was worse than any screaming match could ever be. It was the terrifying stillness that precedes a massive explosion. Brittany sat shivering on the table, clutching the thin paper sheet to her chest, her eyes darting around the room, desperately looking for an escape route that did not exist. Harrison remained frozen, staring at the floor, his mind short-circuiting as the reality of his profound stupidity took root. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was the father? How had she managed to deceive them so completely? And most importantly, how could a genetic marker found predominantly in African or Middle Eastern populations end up in the DNA of a child conceived by a blonde girl from the Midwest? As the seconds agonizingly ticked by, the heavy silence demanded an answer. The genetic impossibility required a biological explanation. The entire family remained completely paralyzed, trapped in their own shock, unable to piece together the final devastating puzzle. The realization crept into the room like a slow, paralyzing frost. Patricia was the first to break the physical stillness. Her eyes darted away from Brittany and moved toward the doctor, her mind desperately trying to process the medical terminology that had just dismantled her entire reality. Sickle cell trait, a genetic marker predominantly found in individuals of African descent. Patricia repeated the demographic criteria in her head. She looked at her son Harrison, who was as pale as the aristocratic ancestors Patricia constantly bragged about. She looked at Brittany, the blonde, blue-eyed girl who had practically engineered her entire personality around looking like a traditional country club trophy wife. There was no biological way these two individuals could combine their DNA to produce this specific genetic outcome. It defied every fundamental law of science. Patricia slowly lifted her head. Her gaze swept past the expensive medical equipment, past the polished mahogany door, and finally came to rest on the far corner of the luxurious consultation suite. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling window, framed by the sweeping view of the Boston skyline, was Jamal. Jamal, the impeccably dressed, quiet, and supportive husband of her daughter Audrey. Jamal, who was the only African-American person in the entire room, and indeed the only African-American person in their entire extended family. As Patricia's gaze locked onto her son-in-law, a visceral magnetic pull seemed to draw the attention of everyone else in the suite. Richard turned his head next, his heavy brow furrowed in severe confusion that rapidly warped into terrifying comprehension. Harrison slowly lifted his eyes from the floor, following his parents' line of sight, until he too was staring directly at the man he had called his brother for the past 4 years. Finally, Audrey turned. She lowered her smartphone completely, her carefully curated social media persona evaporating into thin air. She stared at her husband, the man who had kissed her cheek just 20 minutes ago, and smiled for her camera. The collective weight of their stares hit Jamal like a physical blow. For years, Jamal had been the absolute master of emotional discipline. He had navigated the Harrison family's toxic ecosystem by maintaining an impenetrable stoic facade. He had endured Richard's passive-aggressive jokes and Patricia's thinly veiled condescension by projecting an aura of untouchable, polite serenity. But in this exact moment, facing the undeniable biological evidence of his own catastrophic betrayal, that perfect mask completely shattered. Jamal's shoulders stiffened. The relaxed, confident posture he had maintained all morning instantly dissolved. His dark eyes widened, darting frantically around the room, as if searching for a logical escape route that simply did not exist. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against the tight collar of his custom-tailored dress shirt. A fine sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead, gleaming under the harsh clinical lights. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a denial, perhaps to feign ignorance, but his vocal cords entirely failed him. The profound guilt was written across every single muscle in his face. He looked absolutely terrified. If there was any lingering doubt in the room, if anyone was clinging to the desperate hope of a bizarre medical anomaly, Brittany instantly eradicated it. As the family stared at Jamal, Brittany let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Her hands flew to her face, dropping the thin paper examination sheet. She looked directly at Jamal, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic. It was not a look of confusion. It was the frantic, desperate look of a co-conspirator who realizes the heist has just been blown wide open. "Jamal, please, Brittany," whimpered, her voice trembling so violently it cracked. Tell them it was only that one time after the charity gala. Tell them you said you would handle it." Her words were the equivalent of dropping a lit match into a powder keg. She did not look at Harrison to beg for forgiveness. She looked at Jamal to beg for an alibi. The secret they had aggressively hidden behind polite smiles and family dinners was now lying exposed on the cold, sterile floor of the maternity clinic. The child inside Brittany, the $5 million heir the family had just spent months worshipping, did not belong to the golden son. The child belonged to the son-in-law. Audrey took a slow, unsteady step backward, physically recoiling from her husband. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of the cracking screen echoed through the silent room, but nobody even glanced downward. Audrey's perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pure agony. The woman who thrived on broadcasting her perfect life to the world was now staring at the total annihilation of her marriage. Audrey breathed, her voice a fragile, hollow rasp. "You slept with my brother's pregnant girlfriend. You stood in my kitchen, you slept in my bed, and you were sleeping with her." "Audrey, listen to me," Jamal finally choked out, raising his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "It is not what it looks like. It was a mistake. I was drunk. We were both drunk after the spring fundraiser. She came on to me. I never meant for this to happen. I swear to you, I did not know she was pregnant with my kid until right now. That is a complete lie, Brittany shrieked, instantly abandoning any pretense of loyalty to save her own skin. She quickly scrambled backward on the examination table, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. You already knew. I told you 2 months ago when I realized the timeline did not match up with Harrison. You told me to keep my mouth shut. You told me to let Harrison sign the birth certificate so the baby would get the trust fund. You said we could take the money and run away together after the divorce was finalized. Brittany's confession ignited the room. Audrey let out a sound that did not even seem human. It was the agonizing shriek of a woman whose universe had just been obliterated. She lunged forward before Jamal could defend himself. Her manicured fingers curled into claws as she struck him across the face. The sharp crack echoed against the sterile cabinets. You planned to take my family's money, Audrey screamed, her voice cracking as she struck him again, pushing him backward against the heavy glass window. You stood in my house, you ate at my parents' table, and you were waiting for my brother's divorce so you could run away with his pregnant mistress using our wealth. You disgusting parasite. Jamal raised his forearms to shield his face, trying to grab her wrists, but Audrey was fueled by a violent, blinding adrenaline. He stumbled, his expensive charcoal suit crumpling as he backed into the corner. Audrey, stop, he pleaded, his voice laced with panic. She is lying to save herself. I never agreed to run away with her. I told her to get an abortion. Brittany shrieked from the table, grabbing a plastic tray of medical instruments and hurling it at Jamal. It crashed against the wall, sending sterile cotton swabs clattering across the floor. You told me you loved me, Brittany wailed, scrambling backward until her spine hit the monitoring equipment. You promised we would be rich. You said Harrison was a gullible idiot who would never question the timeline because he was too obsessed with having a son. The words hit Harrison with the physical force of a truck. A gullible idiot. He stood paralyzed in the center of the chaotic room. His hands hung loosely by his sides, his pristine suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. The fighting raged around him. Audrey had turned her violent rage toward the examination table, hurling medical supplies at Brittany while screaming obscenities that shattered her high society persona. Dr. Evans pressed himself flat against the far wall, shouting for clinic security to intervene. But Harrison heard none of it. The noise faded into a dull hum as the catastrophic reality of his situation disassembled his ego. His mind violently snapped backward to the law office 2 hours prior. He saw Clara sitting across the mahogany table. He remembered how stoic she looked, how her hands never trembled when she picked up the pen. He remembered mocking her, telling her not to be vindictive, boasting his new son deserved a proper home. He felt so powerful in that moment. He genuinely believed he was discarding a broken woman to upgrade to a vibrant model who would secure his masculine legacy. Clara did not cry because she was broken. Clara did not cry because she already knew. The realization hit his chest like a physical blow, stealing the oxygen from his lungs. Clara, the forensic accountant, the woman who noticed a missing dollar in a grocery budget. Of course she knew. She had not signed those divorce papers out of defeat. She had signed them to finalize her escape from a burning building before he even smelled the smoke. Harrison staggered backward, his knees unable to support his weight. He hit the edge of the leather-waiting sofa and collapsed onto the cushions, gasping for air. His mind raced through a horrifying inventory of what he had just thrown away. He had relinquished his highly intelligent wife, who loyally managed his entire life for a decade. He had coldly signed away full custody of Emma and Luke, treating them as defective burdens simply because Luke had asthma and Emma did not fit his mother's absurd patriarchal fantasies. He let them walk out believing he was trading up for a superior heir. Instead, he had traded his loyal family for the privilege of raising his brother-in-law's bastard child. He had publicly humiliated himself to secure a $5 million trust fund for a baby that shared 0% of his DNA. He had destroyed his marriage to protect a 24-year-old gold digger who had just openly admitted to conspiring with his sister's husband to rob the Harrison family blind. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity was suffocating. He looked at Brittany, who was now sobbing hysterically and cowering behind Dr. Evans as Audrey tried to slap her across the face. This was the woman he destroyed his life for, a manipulative, opportunistic child who had played him for an absolute fool. He bought her a 4-carat diamond ring. He had picked out a safari theme for the nursery. He had bragged to his friends at the country club about his new perfect life. Harrison buried his face in his hands, his fingers pulling painfully at his hair. A deep, guttural sob ripped from his throat, completely involuntary and utterly pathetic. He had lost everything. He had thrown away a woman who actually loved him for a woman who despised him. He had abandoned his real children for a phantom heir. He was not a king stepping into a new era of family glory. He was the punchline of a sick, twisted joke that his wife had quietly orchestrated from the shadows. 2 clinic security guards burst through the oak doors, their boots pounding against the floor. They immediately grabbed Audrey by the arms, dragging her away from the examination table as she thrashed and kicked, screaming she was going to kill them both. Jamal took the opportunity to bolt toward the doorway, shoving past one of the guards in a desperate bid to escape the room. The sophisticated Harrison family had been reduced to a violent spectacle of complete degeneracy. The pristine consultation suite was trashed medical supplies scattered across the floor, the heavy tension of betrayal staining the sterile environment. Harrison remained slumped on the sofa, paralyzed by the sheer weight of his own catastrophic arrogance, waiting for a bottom that he had not even begun to hit. Patricia had spent her entire adult life curating an image of untouchable perfection. She hosted elite charity galas, dictated the social hierarchy of Boston high society, and viewed her family as a royal dynasty existing far above the laws of ordinary morality. But watching her son-in-law flee through the clinic doors like a common thief, while her daughter screamed obscenities in the grip of 2 security guards, finally shattered her mind. Her gaze dropped to the glass coffee table. The $5 million trust document, the very instrument she had designed to secure her pure-blood heir, lay wrinkled and stained by a spilled espresso. The sheer absurdity of the situation was too much for her fragile, ego-driven constitution to bear. She had eagerly brought her entire family to this clinic to celebrate her daughter's husband, impregnating her son's mistress. Patricia let out a strange, high-pitched wheeze. Her hands flew to her chest, clutching her designer pearls tightly. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and her knees completely buckled beneath her. She collapsed backward, missing the plush leather sofa entirely, and struck the polished marble floor with a heavy, undignified thud. Her expensive beige skirt hiked up past her knees, and her perfectly styled hair sprawled haphazardly across the cold tiles. Richard bellowed his wife's name, his voice booming over the chaotic din of the room. He rushed toward Patricia, his heavy footsteps echoing against the walls. For a brief moment, the titan of commercial real estate looked like nothing more than a panicked, aging man. But Richard Harrison did not know how to handle vulnerability. His instinct was always to dominate, to suppress, and to threaten anyone who witnessed his family in a moment of weakness. He knelt beside Patricia, shaking her shoulder roughly, until she let out a faint groan, before turning his furious gaze upon the clinic staff. "Clear the room!" Richard roared, his face purple with absolute rage. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at the 2 security guards who were still struggling to restrain Audrey near the doorway. "Let go of my daughter this instant. Do you have any idea who I am? I own half the commercial properties in this district. Release her and get out of here before I have you both fired and blacklisted from working in the city ever again." The guards exchanged a wary glance, but they did not release their grip. Audrey was still thrashing wildly, her expensive heels kicking at the heavy oak door frame. Her face was streaked with running mascara and tears of profound betrayal. "I will kill him!" Audrey shrieked, her voice hoarse and ragged. "I will kill them both!" Richard stood up, abandoning his semi-conscious wife on the floor. He marched aggressively toward Dr. Evans, who had quietly retreated behind his computer terminal to protect his equipment. "You listen to me very carefully," Richard growled, leaning heavily over the counter and invading the doctor's personal space. "Whatever happened in this room today is strictly classified under patient confidentiality. If I hear a single whisper about this in the press, or at the country club, or from any of your gossiping nurses, I will bring the full force of my legal team down on this clinic. I will sue you into absolute oblivion. I will make sure you lose your medical license and spend the rest of your life buried in litigation. Dr. Evans did not flinch. He had spent decades dealing with entitled, wealthy men who believed their bank accounts placed them above reality. The doctor calmly adjusted his glasses, looking Richard directly in the eye with a gaze entirely devoid of intimidation. "Mr. Harrison?" Dr. Evans replied, his tone chillingly professional. "My staff and I are bound by strict medical privacy laws. We do not gossip. However, I highly suggest you lower your voice. Your daughter is actively assaulting my security personnel. Your son's former partner has just confessed to infidelity within your family, and your wife requires medical attention on my floor. You are currently creating a massive public disturbance in a healthcare facility. If you do not instruct your family to compose themselves immediately, I will be forced to call the Boston Police Department to restore order and escort you off the premises." The direct threat of police involvement struck Richard like a bucket of ice water. The absolute last thing his fragile real estate empire needed right now was a police report documenting a violent domestic dispute involving his pregnant future daughter-in-law and his fleeing son-in-law. A police presence meant public records. Public records meant eager journalists. Journalists meant complete social and financial ruin. Richard swallowed hard, his blustering bravado rapidly deflating. He turned back to the room, desperately trying to salvage whatever shreds of dignity remained. But there was nothing left to save. The immaculate VIP consultation suite looked like the aftermath of a violent bar brawl. Sterile cotton swabs and knocked-over medical trays littered the floor. Brittany was sobbing loudly in the corner, clutching her stomach and pleading for Harrison to look at her. Harrison remained completely catatonic on the sofa, his eyes staring blankly at the wall, completely broken by the revelation that Clara had outsmarted him flawlessly. Patricia was slowly groaning, trying to sit up while wiping espresso off her ruined suit, completely stripped of her matriarchal superiority. The carefully curated image of the Harrison dynasty had been entirely physically and verbally demolished. They had walked into this building carrying the supreme arrogance of untouchable elites. They had loudly boasted about shedding the dead weight of a loyal wife to secure a pure-blood heir. Now they were exposed as a deeply fractured, morally bankrupt collection of narcissists. They were a family that had happily cannibalized each other for money and status, only to realize they were viciously fighting over an empty throne. The clinic nurses had gathered in the hallway, watching through the glass panes of the heavy doors. They were professional, but they were still human. They saw the mighty Harrisons reduced to a spectacle of sheer degeneracy. Richard realized with a sinking, terrifying feeling in his chest that all his threats of lawsuits and non-disclosure agreements were completely useless. The story was simply too explosive to contain. Whispers would inevitably spread. The country club would know by evening. The corporate board members would hear about the colossal embarrassment before Monday. The immaculate facade he had spent his entire life building was irreparably shattered. He knelt back down on the cold marble floor, awkwardly grabbing Patricia by the arm to haul her to her feet. "Get up, Patricia," he hissed angrily, completely abandoning any pretense of gentle spousal care. "Get up right now. We are leaving." Patricia stumbled upright, leaning heavily against the glass table for balance. She looked around the ruined room, her eyes wide and unfocused. But the trust fund, she mumbled incoherently, her brain still desperately clinging to her previous reality. The $5 million for the baby. "We have to sign the papers to protect the legacy." "There is no baby," Richard snarled, his voice vibrating with a potent mixture of rage and sheer panic. He grabbed the thick manila envelope from the table, violently crushing the pristine legal documents in his fist. "And there is no legacy. The entire thing is a scam." He dragged his disoriented wife toward the door, barking at Audrey to stop screaming and get moving. He completely ignored Harrison, leaving his broken, humiliated son staring blankly at the wall. Richard just needed to get them out of this building before the police arrived. He desperately needed to get them back to their Beacon Hill mansion to regroup, to strategize, and to figure out how to bury this catastrophic scandal. But Richard did not know that his desperate race back to their safe haven was entirely pointless. He did not know that the true nightmare of this day had not even fully begun. As Richard dragged Patricia through the heavy glass doors of the maternity clinic and out into the crisp Boston morning, his tailored wool coat felt suddenly suffocating. He shoved past a group of startled, expectant parents, his grip on Patricia's arm bruisingly tight. Audrey stumbled out behind them, her ruined makeup streaked across her face, still sobbing violently, while the clinic security guard stood firmly at the entrance to ensure they did not return. Harrison and Brittany were completely left behind in the consultation room, two broken pieces of a shattered puzzle that Richard no longer cared to fix. His only priority was getting to his home office. He needed his secure landline, his crisis management team, and a very strong drink. He raised his hand to signal the valet for his SUV. Before the young attendant could even retrieve the keys, Richard's cell phone began vibrating violently inside his breast pocket. He ignored it. He did not have the patience for clients or contractors right now. But the phone stopped immediately, rang again, and then a third time in rapid succession. It was the emergency bypass ringtone assigned strictly to his chief financial officer and his private wealth manager at the bank. Richard snatched the phone from his pocket, his thumb jabbing the answer button aggressively. "What is it?" Richard barked, not bothering with a greeting. "I am in the middle of a massive family crisis. Cancel all my meetings for the week." "Richard, you need to get to my office right now." The voice on the other end belonged to William, the senior vice president of the private wealth division, who had managed the Harrison family money for 2 decades. William did not sound like a subordinate reporting to a powerful client. He sounded like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "I cannot authorize any wire transfers, and I cannot process the trust documents you requested this morning." "What are you talking about?" Richard snapped, his face turning an angry shade of red. "I have tens of millions of dollars flowing through your institution. You will process the trust fund transfer the minute I tell you to, or I will pull every single asset I own and move it to a competitor by noon." "You do not have any assets to move," Richard William replied, his voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper. "You have absolutely nothing. The federal government just locked the doors." Richard froze. The bustling noise of the Boston street traffic seemed to completely fade away. Patricia leaned against the stone pillar of the clinic entrance, wiping her eyes and asking what was wrong, but Richard held up a shaking hand to silence her. "Explain yourself," Richard demanded, his vocal cords tightening. "10 minutes ago, we received an emergency federal injunction from the Internal Revenue Service." William explained, the sheer terror evident in his rapid delivery. "They bypassed the standard audit protocols. They came in with a fully executed criminal seizure order. They flagged 24 of your commercial holding companies for massive tax fraud, offshore evasion, and illegal depreciation manipulation. They have a 400-page whistleblower dossier that completely maps out your entire financial network. They froze your checking accounts, your savings, your corporate operating funds, and your personal investment portfolios." Richard could not breathe. His chest constricted violently. A whistleblower dossier. 400 pages. The level of detail required to unravel his complex web of shell companies could only come from someone who lived inside the numbers. Someone who understood forensic accounting. Someone like Clara. "It is a mistake," Richard choked out, desperate to maintain his crumbling reality. "It is a disgruntled employee. We can fight this. Use the emergency corporate reserve funds to hire the defense team immediately." "There are no reserve funds," William shot back, destroying the last shred of Richard's hope. "The commercial loans on your downtown properties just went into immediate default. 3 major banks called in the $15 million debt simultaneously an hour ago." How Richard roared, ignoring the stares of pedestrians walking past the clinic. "Those loans are secured. They are bulletproof." "They were secured by Clara's credit," William clarified, delivering the fatal blow. "Her lawyers submitted federal declarations of forged signatures and fraudulent representation yesterday afternoon. She legally unlinked herself from your entire portfolio. Because the loans were secured under false pretenses, the banks triggered the immediate recall clauses. The moment Clara removed her financial shield, your debt-to-income ratio imploded." Richard stumbled backward, his back hitting the cold stone wall of the clinic. The realization hit him with the devastating force of a freight train. Clara had not just walked away from the marriage. She had surgically removed the only support beam keeping the entire Harrison empire from collapsing into the dirt. She had smiled at him across that mahogany table, signed the divorce papers, and knowingly handed him a ticking bomb. "I need to get home," Richard gasped, his vision blurring at the edges. "I need to get to the house and secure the physical assets. The artwork, the jewelry. We can liquidate them for cash." William let out a long, defeated sigh. "Richard, you are not listening to me. You do not have a home to go back to." "What do you mean I do not have a home?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking with pure terror. "I own the Beacon Hill estate." "You financed the Beacon Hill estate using an adjustable rate mortgage backed by Clara's income," William corrected sharply. "When she filed the separation of assets, the mortgage automatically defaulted. The bank already processed the foreclosure. The IRS attached a federal tax lien to the property 30 minutes ago. Federal agents are literally at your house right now, Richard. They are changing the locks and putting chains on the gates. The mansion is gone. The cars are gone. Your credit cards have been completely deactivated. You have absolutely nothing left." The line went dead. The dial tone echoed in Richard's ear like the flat line of his entire existence. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the concrete sidewalk and shattering the screen. Patricia rushed forward, grabbing his arm frantically. "Richard, what is it? Who was on the phone? What is wrong with the bank?" Richard looked at his wife. He looked at her expensive designer suit, her pearl necklace, and the leather portfolio she was still clutching, which contained the worthless trust documents for a child that belonged to another man. He looked at Audrey, who was sitting on the curb, sobbing over a ruined marriage to a man who had just betrayed them all. He looked back at the clinic doors, knowing his son was sitting inside completely broken and utterly alone. "We are ruined," Richard whispered, his voice entirely devoid of its booming arrogance. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Clara took everything. The money is gone. The businesses are seized. The government has the house. We are completely bankrupt." Patricia stared at him, her perfectly contoured face twisting into an expression of uncomprehending horror. She opened her mouth to argue, to demand that he fix it, to insist that people of their status simply do not go bankrupt. But as a black town car pulled up to the curb and the valet politely asked for his payment, Richard patted his empty pockets. The platinum cards in his wallet were now just useless pieces of plastic. The elite, untouchable Harrison family was standing on the sidewalk in the middle of Boston, completely destitute, publicly humiliated, and utterly destroyed. The valet cleared his throat, holding out the keys to the SUV. "That will be $45, sir." Richard stared at the young man, his hands trembling at his sides. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his sleek black metal credit card. He handed it over with a sickening feeling twisting in his gut. The valet swiped it through the mobile card reader. A sharp beep cut through the ambient street noise. "Declined, sir. Do you have another card?" Patricia shoved past Richard, her face a mask of desperate denial. "Give me that. The machine must be broken. We are the Harrisons. We own half the real estate in this district." She dug into her purse, producing 3 different platinum cards. She snatched the reader from the valet and swiped the first one. Declined. She swiped the second card. Declined. By the third harsh beep, Patricia's hands were shaking so violently she dropped the card onto the pavement. "I told you," Richard hissed, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her backward. "The accounts are completely frozen. We have zero access to our money." "But we need the car," Patricia wailed, her voice cracking as a group of well-dressed pedestrians slowed down to watch the bizarre spectacle. "We need to go home right now." "There is no home," Richard roared, losing his carefully curated composure. "The IRS has seized the Beacon Hill estate. Federal agents are chaining the gates shut right now. We cannot go back there. We cannot go to the bank. We cannot even buy a cup of coffee." The realization crashed into Patricia with violent physical force. She looked down at the concrete, her breath coming in rapid, shallow gasps. Audrey, still sitting on the curb with her ruined makeup, let out a hollow, manic laugh that sounded much more like an agonizing sob. Richard stared blankly at the busy passing traffic, the intricate pieces of Clara's brilliant puzzle finally snapping together in his mind. The sheer magnitude of her deception was absolutely staggering. For 8 years they had treated her like a glorified secretary. They had mocked her modest background and dismissed her professional career. All the while she had been sitting silently at their dining table, pouring their expensive wine and mapping the exact coordinates of their financial execution. She had possessed complete access to every corporate ledger, every hidden offshore account, and every forged signature he had ever made. She knew about Harrison's affair. She had to have known for months. Instead of throwing a hysterical fit or demanding marriage counseling, she had weaponized her silence. She let Harrison blindly believe he was the mastermind of the divorce. She let Patricia gleefully plan a lavish nursery for a child that Clara likely already knew belonged to Jamal. Clara had timed the federal whistleblower report perfectly. She timed the mortgage default flawlessly. She synchronized the absolute destruction of their entire empire to coincide exactly with the moment they would be standing in this clinic completely distracted by their own monumental arrogance. She played us? Richard whispered the horrifying truth, completely paralyzing him. She smiled right in our very faces, signed the divorce papers, and slaughtered us all without leaving a single fingerprint. The heavy glass doors of the clinic slid open again. Harrison stumbled out onto the sidewalk. He truly looked like a walking corpse. His expensive suit jacket was gone, his tie was loosened, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. He did not have Brittany with him. He walked slowly toward his parents, moving like a man walking toward a firing squad. "It is Jamal's." Harrison choked out his voice, a raspy, broken whisper. "The baby." Brittany confessed everything. "She and Jamal have been sleeping together for a year. They planned to use my name on the birth certificate to secure the $5 million trust fund. They were going to take our money and run away." Audrey let out another loud, agonizing scream from the curb, burying her face in her hands. Her husband and her brother's mistress had conspired to rob the family blind, and they had all walked blindly into the trap. Patricia grabbed Harrison's collar, shaking him desperately. "Well, thank God we did not sign the papers. The trust fund is safe. We still have that money to rebuild." Harrison looked at his mother with dead, empty eyes. "Mom, the trust fund was backed by Dad's commercial equity. I just got a text from my broker before the service cut off. The federal government seized the holding company 20 minutes ago. The money does not exist." Patricia let go of his collar, staggering backward. The elite, untouchable Harrison family was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, completely exposed to the harsh light of reality. The social facade they had violently protected for decades had vanished. Several members of their exclusive country club were walking out of a high-end cafe across the street. Richard saw them stop and point. They were watching Richard Harrison, the titan of Boston real estate, unable to pay a simple valet fee, while his daughter wept on the curb and his son looked like a vagrant. The crushing weight of karma pressed down on them, suffocating and absolute. For years they had demanded absolute loyalty while offering none. They had prioritized bloodlines and status over basic human decency. They had ruthlessly discarded a loyal wife and 2 innocent children because they firmly believed they were entitled to an upgraded pureblood heir. Their boundless greed and staggering arrogance had completely blinded them to the danger lurking in their own home. They had handed a forensic accountant the keys to their fraudulent empire and dared her to look inside. Clara had not just looked. She had meticulously packed the very foundation of their lives with dynamite. Now they had absolutely nowhere to go. They could not call a taxi. They could not book a hotel room. Their prestigious social circle, which survived purely on wealth and reputation, would instantly abandon them. The notoriously judgmental Boston elite did not associate with bankrupt, disgraced tax evaders who were actively involved in sordid, highly public paternity scandals. The excommunication would be swift and merciless. Richard looked at his fractured, penniless family. Audrey was rocking back and forth on the concrete. Patricia was staring blankly at her worthless leather portfolio. Harrison was crying silently, mourning the loss of a life he had arrogantly thrown in the garbage. They had cannibalized each other for a prize that was nothing but a complete illusion. Clara had not needed to scream fight or demand justice. She had simply removed her financial protections, stepped completely out of the way, and allowed the Harrison family to utterly destroy themselves. The absolute brilliance of her execution left Richard speechless. They were left standing on the cold Boston pavement, utterly ruined, forced to live out the rest of their miserable lives in the inescapable prison of their own making, while the Harrison family stood shivering on the cold Boston pavement, utterly ruined and forced to live out the rest of their miserable lives in the inescapable prison of their own making. I was seated comfortably in a warm, dimly lit cafe tucked away on a cobblestone street in Edinburgh. A gentle Scottish rain washed down the window panes, blurring the historic architecture outside into soft strokes of gray and green. Inside, the air smelled rich with roasted coffee beans and freshly baked shortbread. Emma and Luke sat across from me in a plush velvet booth, happily sharing a massive slice of Victoria sponge cake. Luke breathed easily, his chest rising and falling without a single hitch, completely unaffected by the damp climate thanks to the clean, stress-free environment. I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey tea, savoring the rich bergamot flavor. I opened my laptop and connected to the Cafe Secure wireless network. Before boarding my flight in Boston, I had forwarded my old phone number to an encrypted cloud voice mailbox. I did not want to speak to them directly, but as a forensic accountant, I always verify that a transaction has been successfully completed. I clicked open the digital inbox. The screen immediately populated with 74 new voice messages. The timestamps began exactly at 9:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, perfectly aligning with the moment Dr. Evans would have dropped the genetic bombshell. I plugged in my earphones and clicked play on the very first message. Harrison's voice flooded my ears. The arrogant, booming tone of the corporate air was completely gone. In its place was the frantic, high-pitched wheeze of a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse. "Clara, please pick up the phone," Harrison begged, his breath hitching audibly. "You have to answer me. There has been a massive mistake. The baby is not mine. Brittany lied to me. She has been sleeping with Jamal for a year. Jamal, Clara, my own brother-in-law. They were plotting to steal the trust fund. I was totally manipulated. She preyed on my desire for a son. You have to believe me, I was just a victim in all of this. Please call me back." I took another calm sip of my tea. The sheer audacity of Harrison casting himself as the victim was completely expected. He was a man utterly incapable of taking responsibility for his own actions. I clicked the next message, timestamped 30 minutes later. "Clara, the banks just froze everything," Harrison sobbed. Actual pathetic tears echoed through the digital recording. "The IRS is at the house. They put chains on the gates of the Beacon Hill estate. My dad says you removed your name from the guarantor accounts. You cannot do this to me. I have no money. My credit cards are declined. I am standing on the street, and I cannot even afford a taxi. Please, Clara, you always know how to fix the finances. You know the tax laws. Just call the bank and tell them it was a clerical error. Tell them you will back the loans again just for a few months until we sort this out. I miss you. I miss Emma and Luke so much. I love you, Clara. Please save us." I almost laughed out loud. He missed Emma and Luke. Less than 24 hours ago, he had coldly signed away full custody, proudly declaring that his new athletic son deserved a proper environment free from Luke's defective genes. Now that he was destitute, he suddenly remembered he was a father. I scrolled down the list, skipping over a dozen more frantic, weeping messages from Harrison, and clicked on a voice note from Patricia. "Clara, darling," Patricia began. Her voice was trembling, stripping away decades of carefully practiced aristocratic poise. "I know you are upset. I know things were said in anger yesterday. But we are a family, Clara. Family unity is the most important thing in times of crisis. Richard is having chest pains, and Harrison is completely devastated. You are the strongest branch of this family tree. You always have been the pragmatic one, the intelligent one. We need your brilliant mind right now to navigate this misunderstanding with the federal government." I leaned back against the booth, marveling at her staggering hypocrisy. The strongest branch of the family tree. Yesterday, she had called me a genetic and social dead end. She had referred to me as a common peasant who hoarded coupons. Now that her $5 million trust fund was exposed as a phantom asset, and her son's mistress was revealed as a gold-digging fraud, I was suddenly the brilliant savior she desperately needed. I continued listening as Patricia's messages grew increasingly unhinged over the next few hours. The veneer of polite reconciliation rapidly disintegrated into sheer unadulterated panic. "Clara, you have to call off the IRS," Patricia shrieked in a message time-stamped at noon. "They seized my jewelry boxes. They froze my personal accounts. We are sitting in a cheap motel lobby because all of our friends at the country club have stopped answering our calls. You cannot leave us like this. It is incredibly selfish. You took our grandchildren. You took our dignity. You have to wire us some cash from your private accounts. Just $50,000 to hire a defense attorney. We will pay you back, I swear. You owe us for taking you in when you had nothing." The projection was astounding. I did not owe them anything. They had relentlessly exploited my professional skills and my flawless credit rating to sustain their criminal lifestyle. They had treated me like a disposable asset, fully intending to leave me financially ruined, while they paraded around Boston with a stolen fortune and a fake heir. I watched my children across the table. Emma was carefully breaking her shortbread cookie into two perfectly equal pieces, sliding the larger half toward her younger brother. Luke smiled brightly, thanking her before taking a massive bite. They were kind, intelligent, and deeply empathetic. They possessed none of the toxic narcissistic traits that defined the Harrison bloodline. I had successfully extracted them from a poisoned well, ensuring they would grow up knowing their worth was not tied to their bank accounts or their grandfather's fraudulent legacy. I clicked on one final message. It was from Harrison again, left just moments before I logged in. His voice was completely flat, drained of all emotion, representing the hollow shell of a man who finally understood the absolute finality of his ruin. "You knew," Harrison whispered into the receiver. "You knew about Jamal and Brittany. You knew about the bad debt. You sat at that table and you knew exactly what was going to happen to us today. Why did you not just tell me? Why did you let me destroy my own life?" I closed the audio player. The answer was incredibly simple, though he would never be capable of understanding it. I did not destroy his life. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own monumental greed. He had built a house entirely out of matches doused in gasoline and handed the spark to his brother-in-law. All I did was quietly walk out the front door before the whole thing went up in flames. I minimized the cloud application on my laptop and permanently deleted the access shortcut from my desktop. I would never check that voicemail box again. Their frantic pleas, their hypocritical demands for family unity, and their desperate begging for financial rescue would echo into a digital void for all eternity. I had secured my wealth, protected my children, and executed the perfect financial amputation. "Mommy," Emma called out, pointing toward the large window of the cafe. "Look, the rain stopped." I turned my head. The heavy Scottish rain clouds were indeed parting, allowing brilliant shafts of golden sunlight to spill across the wet cobblestone streets of Edinburgh. The gray afternoon was instantly transformed into a bright, welcoming day. "It certainly did, sweetheart," I replied, offering her a warm, unburdened smile. I closed my laptop entirely, sliding it back into my tote bag. The Harrison family was currently sitting in a cheap motel lobby in Boston, completely stripped of their wealth, their status, and their arrogant pride. They were trapped in a nightmare of criminal tax evasion charges, public humiliation, and an explosive paternity scandal that would completely obliterate their social standing. I had left them with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of their own karma. Now it was time to enjoy the beautiful life I had so fiercely protected. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my brand new international smartphone. I had purchased it weeks ago under my new corporate entity, ensuring it remained completely untraceable to anyone back in Boston. The device was sleek, loaded only with essential contacts, and entirely free of the toxic digital footprint that had plagued me for 8 years. However, I still had one final piece of business to conduct using my encrypted laptop. I booted up the machine and opened the desktop application for the secure messaging platform my former in-laws insisted on using for all their elite family communications. The chat interface glowed brightly against the dim ambiance of the Scottish cafe. The group name, the Harrison Dynasty, sat mockingly at the top of the screen. I hovered my cursor over the chat window. I had watched them hurl insults, plan lavish vacations, and systematically exclude me from their lives within this very digital space. It was only fitting that this same space would serve as the venue for their ultimate burial. I placed my fingers over the keyboard. I did not feel any anger. I did not feel any lingering sadness or a desperate need for closure. Forensic accountants deal in absolute finality. We balance the ledger and we close the books. This was my final entry. I began to type my keystrokes slow, deliberate, and flawlessly precise. To the Harrison family. I listened to your voicemails. Every single frantic, desperate, hypocritical one of them. I listened to Harrison blame his mistress. I listened to Patricia beg for the intellect she spent a decade mocking, and I listened to the sound of an arrogant empire burning to the ground. You have all spent the last 8 years treating my existence as a temporary inconvenience. You mocked my background, insulted my children, and aggressively leveraged my pristine financial standing to mask your own colossal incompetence. You thought you were shedding dead weight to make room for a pureblood heir. Instead, you gleefully embraced a fraud and handed me the perfect opportunity to walk away completely unscathed. I paused, taking a sip of my Earl Grey tea, ensuring every word carried the exact weight of a judge handing down a life sentence. Harrison, you proudly traded your loyal family for the privilege of raising your brother-in-law's child. Enjoy your new reality. Patricia and Richard, the Beacon Hill mansion is gone. The $15 million commercial debt is entirely yours to bear. The Internal Revenue Service has the meticulously detailed 400-page dossier I prepared for them. I highly suggest you stop leaving me voicemails and start looking for a very aggressive criminal defense attorney, though I doubt you can afford one now. Jamal, your secret is out. Audrey. I hope your Instagram followers enjoy the reality of your shattered marriage. I looked over the paragraph. It was completely devoid of emotion, reading more like an autopsy report than a goodbye letter. That was exactly the tone I wanted. I added one final unyielding decree. The divorce is finalized. My assets are legally fortified in overseas trusts that your lawyers will never touch. My children are safe from your toxic influence. You wanted a new beginning for your dynasty, and now you have it. Do not attempt to contact me again. Do not email, do not call, and do not try to find us. Any further communication will be forwarded directly to local authorities as targeted harassment. The house is surrendered. The money is secured. Congratulations on your new heir. Let yourselves rot. I moved the cursor over the send button. I did not hesitate. I clicked the button and watched the message appear in the bright blue bubble on the screen. Because I was using a synchronized application, I could see the read receipts actively updating in real time. The little icons next to the message shifted almost instantly. Delivered. Then one by one the indicators changed. Read by Harrison. Read by Patricia. Read by Audrey. Read by Richard. I pictured them huddled together in that cheap motel lobby, staring down at their glowing screens. I imagined the remaining color draining from Patricia's face as she read the words Internal Revenue Service dossier. I envisioned Harrison staring at the confirmation that I had known everything all along, his last shred of hope for a financial rescue completely evaporating into thin air. They were reading the exact terms of their surrender, dictated by the woman they thought they had conquered. A typing indicator appeared at the bottom of the screen. Harrison is typing. I did not wait to see his pathetic response. I moved my cursor up to the group settings. I clicked on the option to leave the chat. A warning prompt appeared asking if I was sure I wanted to permanently remove myself from the conversation. I clicked confirm. The chat window vanished instantly, wiping the Harrison dynasty off my screen forever. But I was not finished. I navigated to the account settings of the application. I scrolled down to the security section and selected the option to permanently delete my account. Another prompt warned me that this action would erase all data, contacts, and history, making it completely impossible for anyone from my past to ever reach me through this platform again. I typed in my password confirming my identity and hit delete. The application closed automatically, logging me out of that life for the final time. The iron boundary was now completely established. There were no cracked doors left open, no trailing threads they could pull to unravel my peace. I had built a fortress around my children and my wealth, and I had just thrown the only key into the deepest part of the ocean. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my tote bag. The digital execution was complete, the physical escape was successful, the financial retribution was absolute. I looked across the table at Emma and Luke. They had finished their cake and were busy drawing pictures on the paper napkins with a set of colored pencils. They looked so incredibly relaxed, entirely shielded from the radioactive fallout occurring an ocean away. "Mommy, are we going to see a castle today?" Luke asked, his eyes wide with bright, genuine curiosity. He took a deep, effortless breath, his lungs clear and strong. "Yes, sweetie," I replied, reaching across the table to affectionately squeeze his small hand. "We are going to see a beautiful castle. We can go anywhere you want." I signaled the barista for the check. I paid the bill using my new corporate card, leaving a generous tip. I helped Emma and Luke put on their warm coats, securing their scarves against the crisp Scottish breeze. We walked out of the cozy cafe and onto the bustling, historic streets of Edinburgh. The air smelled of rain and ancient stone. Every step we took away from that cafe was a step further into a brilliant, unburdened future. The oppressive weight of Boston high society was replaced by the liberating anonymity of a foreign city where no one knew my name, and more importantly, no one could ever leverage my existence for their own selfish gain. I held my children's hands tightly, walking forward with a light heart, leaving the ashes of the Harrison family far behind me. 6 months later, the historic cobblestone streets of Edinburgh felt like the firm, unyielding foundation of my entirely new existence. The crisp Scottish wind whipped around us as Emma, Luke, and I walked toward the magnificent towering silhouette of Edinburgh Castle. Luke marched excitedly ahead, his chest expanding fully, taking in the cold, clear air without a single gasp or wheeze. Emma skipped beside him, snapping photos of ancient buildings with a small digital camera I had bought for her 9th birthday. They were thriving, completely insulated, and an ocean away from the radioactive fallout that had utterly annihilated the Harrison family back in Boston. As a seasoned forensic accountant, I knew firsthand that financial ruin was rarely a sudden event. It was usually a slow, agonizing bleed. But the destruction of Richard's real estate empire had been a spectacular, highly publicized implosion that made local headlines for weeks. The Internal Revenue Service did not offer polite payment plans to arrogant men who brazenly evaded millions in federal taxes through phantom contractors and illegal offshore shell companies. Federal agents had officially seized the Beacon Hill mansion the very day I landed in Scotland. It was quickly sold at a government auction for a fraction of its perceived value, the proceeds immediately confiscated to pay off massive federal tax liens. Richard was indicted on multiple felony counts of tax fraud, wire fraud, and corporate embezzlement. Without my pristine credit score to shield his toxic commercial loans, his remaining properties went into immediate, brutal foreclosure. The mighty patriarch, who once dictated the rules of high society from his leather armchair, was currently awaiting trial and facing a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. Patricia suffered a fate she considered far worse than a federal prison sentence. She was subjected to absolute humiliating social exile. The Boston elite, a tight-knit circle she had spent her entire adult life aggressively climbing and manipulating, dropped her with ruthless, breathtaking efficiency. Her prestigious country club membership was publicly revoked due to unpaid dues and the sheer unmitigated embarrassment of her family scandal. Without her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles, and her sprawling estate, she was violently reduced to renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she once openly mocked at dinner parties. The wealthy women who used to sip expensive champagne at her charity galas now actively crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. She had built her entire identity on wealth superiority and public perception. When those pillars were forcefully stripped away, there was absolutely nothing left but a bitter, isolated woman sitting in a cheap living room. Harrison experienced the most profound psychological and financial collapse of all. His inflated sense of self-worth was entirely tied to his father's bank accounts and his own perceived superiority. When those corporate accounts were frozen, Harrison was exposed as a man with zero actual skills, zero work ethic, and absolutely no liquid assets. The tech startups he used to boast about investing in instantly dropped him from their advisory boards to avoid the PR nightmare. He was forced to take a mid-level high-pressure sales job just to afford basic rent answering to younger managers he would have previously scoffed at during his long country club lunches. Brittany, the opportunistic mistress who was supposed to deliver his perfect heir, did exactly what parasites do when the host finally dies. She fled without a second thought. The moment she realized the $5 million trust fund was a complete illusion and the Harrison fortune had evaporated, she packed her designer bags. She quietly slipped out of Boston before the baby was even born, undoubtedly seeking a new wealthy target who would not look too closely at her deceptive timelines or her genetic history. Harrison was left utterly alone, drowning in mounting legal fees and suffocating under the crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. He had thrown away a highly successful, loyal wife and two beautiful children for a woman who despised him and a baby that biologically belonged to his brother-in-law. The explosive implosion of Audrey and Jamal's marriage provided the final dramatic act in the family's public execution. Audrey, the sister who lived entirely for perfectly curated internet aesthetics, experienced a catastrophic digital reckoning. The shocking truth about Jamal and Brittany's affair leaked into their elite social circles with devastating speed. Audrey filed for a highly contested, incredibly messy divorce. Jamal, having permanently lost the lavish financial backing of his wealthy in-laws, found himself fighting vicious legal battles over the meager, heavily mortgaged assets they had left. Audrey attempted to pivot her online persona to play the victim, but the internet is famously unforgiving. Commenters relentlessly flooded her posts with mocking questions about her broken family, her fraudulent lifestyle, and her husband's infidelity. Unable to handle the daily barrage of public humiliation, she was forced to permanently delete all her social media accounts, completely erasing the only platform where she ever felt important. They had all eagerly cannibalized each other, fighting viciously over the shrinking scraps of a fake empire while I sat quietly across the ocean watching my children flourish. I stopped walking and leaned against a low stone wall, watching Emma and Luke point excitedly at a talented street performer playing the bagpipes. I pulled my wool coat tighter around my shoulders, feeling a profound, deeply rooted sense of absolute peace. I had not won this war by screaming, crying, or throwing plates across a dining room. I had not lowered myself to their pathetic level of petty insults or performative cruelty. I had won by utilizing supreme patience, total silence, and airtight strategy. I observed their weaknesses, documented their financial crimes, and waited for the exact perfect moment to remove the only structural pillar keeping their ceiling from caving in. They fatally mistook my quiet endurance for submissive weakness. They arrogantly believed that because I did not fight loudly, I was not fighting at all. They failed to realize that the most dangerous opponent is never the one screaming in your face. The most dangerous opponent is the one silently doing the math, calculating the precise trajectory of your downfall, and patiently waiting for you to hand them the match. My phone buzzed in my pocket with an alert from my new international accounting firm. A major European client had just specifically requested my forensic expertise for a massive corporate audit. My career was soaring, my finances were impeccably secure, and my home was filled with genuine love instead of toxic expectations. I looked out over the ancient, enduring city of Edinburgh. The air was crisp, unburdened, and entirely mine. I took my children's hands, smiled at the brilliant blue sky, and walked forward into a beautiful, quiet life, leaving the dark ashes of the Harrison family buried forever in the rubble of their own making. Clara's meticulously orchestrated escape from the toxic Harrison family teaches a profound lesson about the nature of true power. Often, society conditions us to believe that standing up for ourselves requires explosive confrontations, dramatic screaming matches, or immediate visceral retaliation. However, this story beautifully illustrates that the most devastating and effective response to abuse is silent strategic self-preservation. For 8 years, Clara endured relentless emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and financial exploitation. Her in-laws mistook her composed demeanor for weakness, assuming that because she did not fight loudly, she was not fighting at all. The core lesson here is that our self-worth is not dictated by the arrogant narratives toxic people construct around us. Instead of wasting her energy trying to convince narcissistic individuals of her value, Clara redirected that energy into absolute focus. She understood that engaging in their chaotic drama would only tether her closer to their dysfunction. By prioritizing logic over raw emotion, she managed to untangle her life and secure her children's future. True strength lies in recognizing when a situation is unsalvageable and having the patience to build a secure exit strategy. Clara did not destroy her in-laws. She simply removed the protective shield she had been forced to provide, allowing their own deceit and greed to orchestrate their downfall. Healing from deep betrayal does not always require forcing an apology from abusers. Sometimes the ultimate closure is walking away with your peace intact and letting karma take its natural course. Ultimately, we hold the pen to our own life scripts, and we always have the power to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Take a moment today to evaluate your own boundaries and bravely step away from any relationship that demands you sacrifice your peace for their comfort.